The morning my own son changed the locks on the shop I built with my bare hands. I stood there on the frozen gravel for a long minute, watching my breath fog in the October air, and I understood something I had been refusing to understand for almost 3 years. A man can lose his own life while he is still living it. He can lose it slowly, quietly, in pieces so small that no single piece feels like enough to fight over. A bench moved into a corner, a box of tools carried up to the attic, a handshake he gave away on a Sunday evening because he loved his boy more than he loved his pride. And one morning, he wakes up and finds himself standing outside a building with his own name painted on the door, holding a key that doesn't turn anymore. My name is Thomas Whitaker, and I want to tell you a story about what happens when a father gives away too much, too quietly, for too long. It's a story about wood, and about hands, and about the things we make with both of them. It's a story about a son who thought speed was the same thing as skill, and a father who let him believe it because he was tired of arguing. It's a story about a stack of white oak boards I had been keeping behind my shop for 5 years, and a letter from my late wife that I had been afraid to open for 4. And it's a story about the day a wealthy man from Richmond drove 3 hours to tell my son the family name was finished, and what I did when I heard him say it. I'm 69 years old this fall. I live alone in the same farmhouse where I raised that boy, on 6 acres of land at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Bedford County, Virginia. My wife Eleanor passed 4 years ago come February, from a second stroke that took her in her sleep before I could even put my hand on her cheek to say goodbye. We had been married 41 years. We had built that shop together from a one-room shed behind my daddy's old tobacco barn. She kept the books, I kept the wood. And when our boy Daniel was born in 1984, we hung a little wooden sign over the shop door that read, "Whitaker and Son Fine Woodworks." Even though the son in question was 8 pounds and 4 ounces and couldn't hold a pencil yet, let alone a chisel. I tell you that part first, because I want you to understand what the sign meant before I tell you what happened to it. That morning in October, when the key wouldn't turn, I didn't get angry. I want to say I did, because anger would have been easier. Anger is a clean feeling. Anger gives a man somewhere to put his hands. But what I felt standing there on that gravel was not anger. It was something quieter and older and harder to name. It was the feeling of a man who has known for a long time that something is wrong, and who has just been handed the proof. I pulled the key out, looked at it, put it back in, wiggled it the way you wiggle a key when you don't yet want to admit what the lock is telling you. And after the 3rd try, I let my hand fall to my side, and I laughed. Soft, dry laugh. The kind a man laughs when crying would feel like too much trouble. Then I walked around the back. The back door of the shop is one I cut and hung myself in 1979. Out of a single slab of red oak I had pulled out of a creek bed up in Amherst County the year before. It has my initials carved into the bottom corner, small enough that you wouldn't see them unless you were looking. That door has never been locked in 46 years. Not once. My daddy used to say a workshop with a locked back door is a workshop that has something to hide. And a man who works honest doesn't need to hide anything. The back door opened the way it always opens, a little stiff in the cold. A little groan in the lower hinge that I had been meaning to oil since August. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me the way it always hits me, even after all these years. Pine resin and white oak dust, and the faint, sweet tang of linseed oil, the smell of a life, my life, built one shaving at a time. The shop was dark. The big sliding doors at the front were still closed. The new fluorescent lights my son had installed last spring were off. I didn't turn them on. I never liked them anyway. They make a humming sound that gets inside your teeth, and they wash the color out of the wood so you can't read the grain right. I walked over to my bench by feel, the way a man walks through his own house in the middle of the night. Except when I got there, my bench wasn't where it used to be. I stood there in the half-dark, my hand reaching out for a workbench that had stood in the same spot since 1981, and my fingers closed on empty air. For just a second, I thought maybe I had gotten turned around, the way old men sometimes do. I took a step back, looked around, and then I saw it. My bench had been moved against the far wall, near the door to the lumber kiln. A small printed sign was propped up on top of it, the kind of sign you'd see in a museum. I walked over slowly, because my back was stiff from the cold, and because I already knew, somewhere underneath my ribs, what the sign was going to say. It said, Whitaker Heritage Display, Original Workbench, circa 1981. I stood there for a long time looking at that sign. My coffee pot was gone. My chisel rack was gone. The little framed photograph of Eleanor I kept above the bench, the one from our trip to the Outer Banks the summer before she got sick, was gone too. In their place, somebody had laid out a row of brochures, Whitaker Modern, Engineered Elegance, precision crafted for the 21st century home. I picked one up. The paper was thick and glossy and cold to the touch. There was a picture on the front of a dining room table I had never seen before in my life, sitting in a house I had never been inside, photographed by a person I had never met. And in small letters at the bottom, it said a Whitaker and Son Company, established 1983. I set the brochure back down, very carefully, the way you set down something that doesn't belong to you. Then I went and found my coffee pot. The coffee pot was in a cardboard box on a shelf in the kiln room, sitting on top of a stack of old invoices from the 1990s. Somebody had labeled the box in black marker "Dad Stuff," donate or toss. The handwriting was Daniel's. I knew it the way a man knows his own son's footsteps in the hallway. I took the pot out of the box. I did not take anything else. I told myself I would come back for the photograph of Eleanor later, when my hands were steadier. I carried the pot back into the main shop and set it on the workbench where the bench used to be. And then I remembered there was no bench there anymore, and I had to pick it up and carry it across the room and set it down on what used to be my own bench, but was now a heritage display. I plugged it in. I filled it from the spigot by the kiln. I stood there with my hand on the lid while it warmed up, because the warmth of an old aluminum coffee pot in a cold workshop is one of the few small comforts a man my age still trusts. While it brewed, I walked the shop. 43 years I had been walking that shop. I knew every knot in every floorboard. I knew which spot on the north wall would weep a little moisture in August, and which corner of the rafters held a swallow's nest every spring. I knew the shop the way a husband knows his wife's breathing in the dark. And as I walked it that morning, I was reading it the way I read a piece of wood when somebody brings it in and asks me what it's good for. I was looking for the grain. The grain told me a story I already half knew. In the center of the shop, where the long assembly table used to stand, there was now a machine, a big one, painted gray, the color of a battleship, with a glass hood and a keypad on the side, and a nameplate that said something in German I could not pronounce. A CNC router. I had seen one before, at a trade show in High Point 3 years ago, when Daniel had dragged me along to show me what he called the future. I had stood in front of one, then two, and I had told him what I thought, which was that a machine can cut a shape, but a machine cannot feel a tree. He had laughed at that, not unkindly. The way a son laughs at a father who still uses a flip phone and writes checks at the grocery store. The CNC machine had a thin layer of sawdust on top of it. Not the good kind of sawdust, the kind that smells like a forest after rain. This was a finer dust, almost powdery, gray-brown, the kind you get from cutting engineered board. I ran my finger through it and rubbed it between my thumb and forefinger. It felt like nothing, like flour, like the absence of wood. Along the east wall, where I used to keep my hand planes hanging from wooden pegs in the order I had owned them, there was now a pegboard, and on the pegboard there were pneumatic nail guns and electric sanders and a row of those orange plastic cases that hold cordless drills. My planes were gone. I did not have to ask where. I already knew that if I climbed the ladder to the attic above the kiln room, I would find them in a box, and the box would be labeled in the same black marker as the coffee pot. I poured myself a cup of coffee. Black. The way I have drunk it for 52 years. Since my daddy first let me have a sip at the breakfast table when I was 17 years old and about to go to work for him for the first time. I stood there with the cup warming my hands, and I looked at the shop my son had made out of the shop I had given him. And I tried very hard not to feel what I was feeling. I want to be honest with you, because there is no point telling a story if you are not going to be honest in it. What I felt that morning was not righteousness. It was not the noble grief of a craftsman watching his trade get trampled. Those are the feelings a man wishes he could feel in a moment like that, because they are clean and they are easy to live with. What I actually felt was smaller and meaner, and a great deal more human. I felt useless. I felt like a man who had outlived his own purpose, and who had been given the privilege of watching it happen in real time, in his own building, with his own son's handwriting on the box that held his coffee pot. It is a hard thing to admit. I am admitting it to you anyway, because I am 69 years old, and I have learned that the things we will not say out loud are the things that eat us hollowest from the inside. I drank my coffee. I watched the gray morning light come up through the high windows. I listened to the shop wake around me, the old beams ticking as the heat from the propane unit started to climb, the swallows stirring up in the rafters even though they should have been long gone south by now. And I made a decision, although at the time I did not know it was a decision. I decided to go check on the lumber. Behind the main shop, out under the long tin-roofed shelters my daddy and I built the summer I came home from Fort Bragg in 1973, I kept my lumber, stacked, stickered, air-drying the way wood was meant to dry, slow and patient and honest. Cherry, walnut, soft maple, red and white oak, some poplar for the secondary work, a little bit of pine for the cheap orders, although I never much liked pine because pine bruises if you look at it wrong. And under the third shelter, the one farthest from the shop, I had a stack of boards that I had not let anybody touch for 5 years. I put my coffee cup down on a sawhorse, and I walked out the back door, across the gravel yard, past the kiln, past the lumber I sold from and the lumber I worked from, all the way down to that third shelter. The frost was already starting to lift off the grass where the sun was hitting it. My breath was still fogging. My back was already complaining about the cold. In that low, slow way it complains every morning now, like an old dog who doesn't want to go for a walk but will come if you whistle. The boards were where I had left them. White oak, quarter sawn, 23 boards, ranging from 8 to 12 feet long, 1.75 inches thick. I had cut them myself, from a single tree. A big old white oak that had stood at the edge of my property since long before my daddy bought the land in 1946. Eleanor and I had been married under that tree. We had taken our wedding photographs leaning against its trunk. Back when we were both so young, we did not yet understand that everything we were standing on top of was already a gift. The tree had come down in a storm in the spring of 2020. I had been the one to bring it down the rest of the way, carefully, with a chainsaw and tears running down my face that I would not have admitted to anyone alive. I had milled it myself. I had stickered it myself. I had been drying it for 5 years under that tin roof, turning the boards once a season, watching the moisture content come down a percentage point at a time the way you watch a child grow. I had not told anyone what the wood was for. Not even Eleanor, before she died, although I think she may have guessed. I laid my hand on the top board that morning, and the wood was cold, and the grain under my palm was so tight and so straight, you could have used it for a ruler. I stood there with my hand on it for a long time. Then I said quietly, to nobody in particular, although maybe to the tree, and maybe to my wife, and maybe just to the part of myself that was still listening. Not yet. Not for this. And I walked back to the shop to wait for my son. Daniel got to the shop at 7:45, which was about an hour and a half later than I used to get there back when the shop was mine. He came in through the front, which meant he used his own key, which meant he knew the front lock had been changed, and he had not bothered to tell me. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee from the gas station out on Route 43, the kind that come in paper cups with plastic lids, and he was talking on his phone before he even got the door closed behind him. I was sitting on the heritage display, which is to say, I was sitting on my own workbench against the far wall, drinking the last of my coffee out of the aluminum pot. He saw me, and his face did a small thing that I recognized, because I had seen it on his face 1,000 times when he was a boy, and he had been caught doing something he knew he should not have been doing. It was there for half a second. Then it was gone, and he was smiling the bright, tight smile he had learned at business school, the one that does not quite reach his eyes. "Dad," he said. He held up one of the paper cups. "Brought you a coffee." "Already got one," I said. I lifted the aluminum pot. He looked at the pot. He looked at me sitting on the bench. He looked at the empty spot in the middle of the shop where the bench used to be. Something passed across his face that might have been guilt and might have been irritation. With Daniel, those 2 things have always lived next door to each other. "I was going to call you about that," he said. He set the coffees down on the CNC machine, the bench. "We're trying to open up the floor plan for tours." "Tours," I said. Buyer tours, designer tours, magazine people sometimes. He rubbed the back of his neck, which is what he does when he is about to say something he has been rehearsing. Dad, the way we used to lay this place out, it looked like a workshop. Now we need it to look like a brand. I let that word sit in the air between us for a moment. Brand. It is a word I have heard a lot in the last 3 years. And every time I hear it, I think of cattle. I think of a hot iron pressed into the flank of an animal that does not get to decide what name it carries. Where are my planes? Daniel, I asked him. They're safe. They're up in the attic. I put them in a box. And my chisels? Same place. Dad. None of it is gone. It's all here. I just needed the floor space. I nodded slowly. I did not say anything for a while. Daniel does not do well with silence. He never has. When he was 12 years old and I would catch him at something, I learned that the fastest way to find out what he had done was to sit on the porch and not say a word for about 3 minutes. He would crack like a dry walnut every time. He cracked that morning too. Dad, look, we need to talk about something. I was going to bring it up at dinner on Sunday, but since you're here... He picked up his coffee, took a sip, set it down again. I've got Harlan Pierce coming next week. He's bringing his project manager. They want to talk about the Blue Ridge contract. The hotel job, I said. 40 units, bedroom suites, dining sets, lobby pieces. The biggest contract this shop has ever signed. He said this shop has ever signed the way a young man says something he wants to be true. I let him have it. There was no point correcting him about the contracts I had signed in 1996 and 2004, both of which had been larger, although neither of which had been with anyone as well connected as Harlan Pierce. That's good, son, I said, and I meant it. Part of me meant it. The part of me that had been a father for 41 years, and that wanted, the way every father wants, for his boy to do well in the world. It is good, Daniel said. But Dad, I need to know we're on the same page about how we're going to fulfill it. What page do you think I'm on? He picked up one of the glossy brochures from the heritage display. He held it out to me. I did not take it. He set it back down. This page, he said, engineered hardwood substrate, veneer overlay, CNC milled to spec. We can produce a bedroom suite in 4 days that used to take you 3 weeks. The margins. Dad. The margins on this are going to put Lily through college twice over. He said Lily's name the way he always says it when he wants to win an argument. Not unkindly. He loves that little girl more than he loves his own breath. And I know it. And he knows I know it. And we have both learned to use her name as a kind of currency between us. It works on me, mostly. It always has. What kind of substrate? I said. It's a high-density engineered board, German-made, better than plywood, better than MDF. It's what all the high-end shops are using now. What's the moisture rating on it? He paused, just for a second, but I caught the pause. It's rated for interior residential use, he said. Climate-controlled environments. Daniel, the Blue Ridge Hotel sits at 3,000 feet of elevation. Winter lows of -10. Summer humidity at 90% some weeks. That building swings 40 degrees and 60% humidity inside a 12-hour window in October. They have HVAC, Dad. They have HVAC in the lobby. They have HVAC in the suites. They do not have HVAC in the corner of the lobby, where the buffet is going to sit against the exterior wall under a window that faces west and gets afternoon sun. That corner is going to swing 15 degrees twice a day, every day for 6 months out of the year. He looked at me. For a long moment he just looked at me, and I could not read what was on his face. It might have been respect. It might have been impatience. It might have been the look a son gives a father when he is trying to decide whether to take him seriously or to manage him. I think it was the last one. I am sorry to say it, because he is my son and I love him. But I think it was the last one. Dad, he said, finally. His voice had gone softer. The way you speak to a person you are about to ask for something. I want to bring you the contract this Sunday. After dinner. I want you to look it over. What contract? Operating control, signature authority, the legal stuff. Right now, half our vendors still want to talk to you, and I'm getting cut out of decisions on my own shop floor. My own shop floor. He did not even hear himself say it. That is the thing I want you to understand. He did not hear it. The words came out of his mouth the way water comes out of a faucet. Easy, automatic, without any awareness of the pipes underneath. To him, the shop was already his. He was just asking me to sign the paperwork that would make the world catch up to what he already believed. I sat there on the heritage display, holding my aluminum coffee pot, and I looked at my boy. I looked at his good wool coat and his clean haircut, and the lines starting around his eyes that I had not noticed until that moment. He was 41 years old. He had a wife and a daughter and a mortgage that I knew was bigger than he could comfortably carry. Because Eleanor and I had co-signed it 5 years ago, and I still got the statements forwarded to me by mistake. He was a man trying very hard to outrun something. I could see it on him the way you can see a limp on a man who is trying to walk normal. Bring it to Sunday dinner, I said. I'll look at it. He let out a breath he had been holding. He smiled, and this time the smile reached a little closer to his eyes. He came over and put his hand on my shoulder. Brief, awkward. The way grown sons touch their fathers in this country. Like they are not quite sure they are allowed to anymore. Thanks, Dad, he said. Thank you. He picked up his coffee and walked out to the office at the side of the shop, already back on his phone. Already 3 conversations ahead of the one we had just finished. I sat there a while longer. I finished the last of the coffee in the aluminum pot. I looked at the place where my bench used to be. Then I got up, and I went home. Sunday came the way Sundays come at my age. Slow at the start, slow in the middle, and then suddenly it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was standing in my kitchen putting on a clean shirt and trying to remember if I had taken my blood pressure pill that morning. Daniel and his wife Rebecca live about 6 miles from me, on a piece of land they bought from a developer back in 2017. It is a nice house, too big for 3 people, in my opinion. But I have learned not to say so. Rebecca is a kind woman. She has been good to my son and good to my granddaughter, and she has never once made me feel like the old man at the table. which is more than I can say for some of the women my friends' sons have married. I drove over with a jar of apple butter that I had put up myself back in September, from the trees behind the workshop. The jar sat on the seat next to me the whole drive, and I held my hand on the lid when I went around the curves, the way Eleanor used to do for me when I was driving and she was riding shotgun. It is a small thing, holding a jar steady on a curve, but I have noticed that the small things are what go missing first when you lose someone, and they are also what come back to find you when you are not expecting them. Lily met me at the door before I could knock. She always does. She is 7 years old, and she has her grandmother's eyes, which is to say she has eyes that see more than a child her age has any business seeing. "Grandpa," she said, and she wrapped both arms around my leg the way she has been doing since she could walk. "Your hands are cold." "They're always cold in October, sugar." "Why?" "Because they're old hands, and old hands need a fire." She thought about that. She thinks about everything I say, which is one of the great honors of my life and also one of the things that keeps me careful. "I'll build you a fire," she said. "Very serious. After dinner. I know how. Daddy showed me. I'd be much obliged." Inside. The house smelled like a pot roast, and like the lavender candles Rebecca always lights for Sunday. Daniel was in the kitchen helping his wife, which he has gotten better at over the years. He nodded at me when I came in, and he poured me a glass of the iced tea Rebecca makes from her grandmother's recipe down in Lynchburg, with the lemon peel left in. I sat at the kitchen island and watched them work. I watched my son move around his own kitchen. His shoulders relaxed in a way they never are at the shop. And I thought, he is happy here. Whatever else is going wrong, he is happy here. It was a small comfort. I held on to it. Dinner was quiet and easy. Lily told us about her week at school, which had involved an incident with a substitute teacher and a science project about caterpillars. Rebecca told us about her sister in Roanoke, who had just had a baby. Daniel mostly listened, which is what he does when he is rehearsing something in the back of his mind. After Rebecca took Lily upstairs for her bath, my son and I sat at the dining room table with the dishes still on it and the candles burning down, and he reached into the leather folder he had set on the sideboard, and he took out the papers. He did not slide them across the table at me. He set them down between us. That is one thing I will give him. He did not push. "Take your time. Dad," he said. "It's just a transfer of operational authority. You'd still hold your equity. You'd still be a Whitaker on the sign. But day-to-day decisions, vendor contracts, payroll, all of it would come under me. Clean. Simple. No more confusion about who does what." I picked up the papers. I read them. I will not pretend I understood every line. The lawyers had done their work, and the lawyers had used the kind of language lawyers use when they want a thing to look bigger than it is. But I understood enough. I had spent 43 years signing contracts. I knew what I was looking at. What I was looking at was the end of me at that shop. Oh, I would keep my equity. I would keep my name on the sign. Daniel had told me the truth about that part. But what he had not told me, and what was right there on page 4 if you knew where to look, was a clause that said the holder of operational authority could reassign, relocate, repurpose, or retire any equipment, inventory, signage, or workspace at his sole discretion. which is a lawyer's way of saying he could box up my chisels and put them in the attic and call it heritage preservation. And there would not be a thing in the world I could do about it. I set the papers down. I took a sip of my iced tea. The lemon peel had settled to the bottom of the glass, and I tilted it to bring the flavor back up, the way Eleanor had taught me 40 years ago. "Why now, son?" I asked him. He had been waiting for that question. He had an answer ready, and the answer had clearly been polished, and I could tell he was a little disappointed that I had asked it so simply, because he had been hoping for a fight he could win with a prepared speech. Because the shop can't keep moving forward with two captains. Dad. The Pierce contract is a turning point. If we land it the right way, we're looking at 3 more like it in the next 18 months. National attention, maybe a magazine feature. But every one of those contracts is going to ask who has signature authority. And right now, the answer is murky. I need it clean. I need to be able to say I'm in charge and have the paper that proves it. And if I don't sign... He looked at me. For just a moment, the polished version of him cracked, and I saw what was underneath. What was underneath was tired. Underneath was a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time, and who needed it to be lighter, and who did not know how to ask for help in any language other than paperwork. If you don't sign, Dad, we lose Pierce. He told me at the last meeting. He said his board won't approve a contract with a vendor who has ambiguous ownership structure. Those were his words. Ambiguous ownership structure. And if we lose Pierce, we lose the year. And if we lose the year, I don't know what I'm going to do. Dad, I really don't. He did not cry. Daniel does not cry in front of me. He has not cried in front of me since he was 14 years old. And I have come to understand that this is a wound I helped to make. Although that is a different story for a different night. But his voice went somewhere it did not usually go, and I heard it. I want you to understand something, because if you do not understand this, you will not understand the rest of the story. I did not sign those papers because Daniel convinced me. He did not convince me. I knew, sitting there at that table, with the candles burning down and the smell of pot roast still in the air, that the plan he was describing was going to fail. I knew it the way a man who has worked white oak for 43 years knows that you cannot put engineered board into a building at 3,000 feet of elevation and expect it to hold. I knew he was wrong. And I signed anyway. I signed because he was my boy. Because he was 41 years old and afraid. And because the only thing in the world I had ever wanted, from the day Eleanor put him in my arms at Lynchburg General Hospital in the summer of 1984, was for him to believe that his father trusted him. Sometimes love is the dumbest thing a man can do. I have been thinking about that a lot lately. I have been thinking that maybe the people who tell you love is wise have not actually loved very many people. Because real love, the kind that costs you something, is almost always a little bit stupid. It signs papers it should not sign. It gives away things it should keep. It bets on a horse it has watched lose 6 races in a row, because the horse is family. I signed the papers. Daniel let out a long breath. He reached across the table and squeezed my forearm. Hard. The way men squeeze a thing when they do not have the words. "Thank you, Dad," he said. "Thank you. You won't regret this." I drove home that night the long way. past the cemetery on the hill where Eleanor is buried. I did not stop. I just slowed down enough to look. The moon was up, and the frost was already settling on the headstones, and I could see the white shape of hers from the road. I rolled the window down, even though it was cold. I said, out loud, into the dark. I signed it. Ellie. I signed it. I hope to God I did the right thing. The wind moved through the dry grass beside the road. The headstones kept their counsel, and I drove the rest of the way home in silence, with the jar of apple butter empty on the seat beside me, and the weight of my own signature heavier in my chest than any tool I had ever carried. That was the end of October. 6 weeks later. The phone would ring at 4:15 in the morning, and my son's voice on the other end would tell me what I had already known when I picked up the pen. But I did not know that yet. That Sunday night, driving home under a frost moon with my window rolled down. All I knew was that I had loved my boy the only way I knew how, and that the bill for that love had not yet come due. The week after I signed the papers, my chisels disappeared. I want to be precise about that, because the word disappeared is not quite right. Chisels do not disappear. Somebody moves them. Somebody decides where they should go, and then somebody carries them there, and then somebody else either notices or does not notice. In this case, the somebody was Daniel. Although he would not say so when I asked him, he would say we. He would say the guys cleared off the south wall. He would say, I thought we discussed this, which is what a man says when he wants you to feel like you have already lost an argument you have not yet started. I came in on a Tuesday morning about 10 days after Sunday dinner. I was not coming every day anymore. I had been telling myself it was because of my back, which had been worse than usual that fall. But the truth was that walking into that shop had started to cost me something. I did not have a lot of left. I would go in for a few hours, sit on the heritage display, talk to whoever still wanted to talk to me, and then drive home and sit on the porch for the rest of the afternoon, trying to remember why I had bothered. That Tuesday morning, the south wall of the shop was empty. The south wall was where my chisels had hung for 41 years. I had built the rack myself, out of a piece of curly maple I had saved from a job back in 1983. Each chisel had its own slot. I had arranged them by size at first, the way most men do. But somewhere around 1995, I had reorganized them by use. The chisels I reached for the most went on the left, closest to where my right hand would come up off the bench. The chisels I used once a month went in the middle. The specialty chisels, the ones I had inherited from my daddy and his daddy before him. The ones with handles worn smooth by 3 generations of Whitaker palms, went on the right. The rack was gone. The wall was gone, in the sense that it was no longer the wall I knew. Somebody had hung a flat-panel television on it, not a small one, a big one, the kind they put up in sports bars. And underneath the television, they had built a long counter. And on the counter, they had laid out fabric swatches and finish samples and a row of those small wooden blocks that show different stains. A young woman I had never seen before was standing at the counter arranging the wooden blocks. She had a clipboard. She was wearing the kind of glasses that cost more than my truck. She looked up when I came in. She did not know who I was. I could see her trying to place me, the way young people try to place old men they assume must be lost. "Sir," she said, "can I help you find someone?" "I'm looking for my chisels," I said. She blinked. I'm sorry. My chisels, they were on this wall. She set down the wooden blocks. She looked at me more carefully now. Are you Mr. Whitaker? I'm one of them. Oh. She did a small smile, the kind young people do when they have been told to be polite to the difficult ones. I'm Megan. I'm the new design consultant. Mr. Whitaker. Your son had us move some things last week. I think he had the older equipment relocated to the storage area. I can call him for you. Don't bother him, I said. I know where the storage area is. The storage area was the attic above the kiln room. I had not climbed those stairs in 2 years, because my knee had been telling me not to. That morning I climbed them anyway. Slow. One step at a time. Holding onto the rail with my right hand and using my left hand to pull myself up by the studs in the wall. By the time I got to the top, I was breathing harder than I wanted to admit, and there was a sharp little pain in my left hip that I made a note not to mention to anyone. The attic was full of boxes. I do not know what I had expected. Maybe I had expected to find my tools laid out on a shelf, somewhere I could see them. Maybe I had expected an apology in the form of orderliness. But what I found was an attic that looked like the back room of a thrift store, with cardboard boxes stacked 4 high in some places, and every box labeled in the same black marker, and every label written in my son's handwriting. Dad's chisels, Dad's planes, Dad's marking gauges, Dad's sharpening stones, Dad's old jigs, maybe useful, Dad's sort later. I stood at the top of the stairs for a long time looking at those boxes. I want to tell you what I felt. I have been telling you this story, to be honest about what I felt. Because I think a story without honest feeling is just a list of events. But what I felt in that attic was hard to name, and I am still not sure I have the right word for it. It was something like the feeling you get when you walk past a building you used to work in and realize they have changed the sign and you do not know the new name. It was something like the feeling of finding an old photograph of yourself and not recognizing the man in it. It was the feeling of being preserved in a way that meant being put away. I opened the first box. My chisels were there, all of them. He had not lost them. He had not sold them. He had wrapped each one carefully in newspaper, the way you wrap good china for a move, and he had laid them in the box in 2 neat rows. The handles were sticking up so you could read the brands burned into the wood. Stanley, Marples, Sorby, and at the bottom, in their own row, the 3 old ones, the Whitaker chisels. My daddy used to call them, although they were not made by anybody named Whitaker. They were made in Sheffield, England, in the 1890s, and my grandfather had bought them off a tool peddler in Roanoke in 1922 for $3 and a chicken. I picked up the oldest one. The handle was beech, dark with linseed oil and 100 years of hand sweat. The blade was thinner than the modern ones, sharpened down by generations of stones until it was a different tool than it had started out as. My daddy used to say that a chisel only becomes itself after about 40 years of use, the way a man only becomes himself after about 40 years of living. Before that, he said, you are just carrying around what other people gave you. I held that chisel for a long time, sitting on a wooden crate in my own attic, surrounded by boxes labeled with my own name. And I did something I had not done in front of anyone in a long time. I did not cry. Exactly. I am not sure I would call it crying, but my eyes wet up, and my throat got tight, and I sat there and let it happen, because there was no one watching, and because at 69 years old, you stop being embarrassed by the things your body wants to do. I sat there until I heard footsteps on the stairs. It was Daniel. Dad. His voice came up before his head did. Megan said you were up here. You shouldn't be climbing these stairs. Your knee. I did not answer him right away. I put the chisel back in the box. I wrapped it in the newspaper the way he had wrapped it. I closed the lid. When he got to the top, he saw me sitting on the crate and his face did that thing again. The thing it had done when he was a boy. For half a second, I saw the kid in him. Then he straightened his shoulders, and he was 41 again, and he was the man who had labeled these boxes. You should have told me you were coming in, he said. I would have had everything ready. I came to see my shop, I said. He flinched, just a little. He noticed I had said my shop, and I noticed him noticing, and neither of us said anything about it. Dad, we talked about the south wall. The design consultations need to happen on the floor. We can't be sending buyers to a back office. It's a presentation issue. I didn't come up here to argue, son. Then what did you come up here for? I looked at him. I looked at my boy, standing at the top of the attic stairs in his clean wool coat, with his clean haircut, with his clean, tight smile. And I told him the truth. I came up here because I wanted to put my hand on something that was still mine. He did not have an answer for that. He stood there a long moment. Then he came over and sat down on the crate beside me, careful, the way a man sits down next to a wounded animal he is not sure of. Dad, he said. His voice was lower. It's all still yours. Nobody's taking anything from you. I looked at the boxes around us. I did not say anything. He understood, I think. Or he understood enough. He put his hand on my shoulder, briefly, and he stood up, and he said, "Take your time up here. I'll bring you a coffee." He went back down the stairs. He did not bring me a coffee. He got busy with something else. The way he always gets busy with something else when a feeling gets too close. I sat in the attic for another half hour. I opened each box. I touched each tool. I said hello to each one of them, the way you say hello to old friends in a hospital, when you are not sure how many more visits you are going to get. And then I climbed back down the stairs, and I drove home, and I did not go back to the shop for 9 days. In those 9 days, I learned something about being old that I had not understood before. When you are a young man, time is a thing you spend. You pay for things with it. An hour of work for an hour of wage. A year of effort for a step up the ladder. A decade of marriage for a house with the mortgage paid off. Time is a currency, and you carry it around in your pocket and you spend it on what you think is worth buying. But when you get to my age, time stops being a currency. It becomes something more like weather. It happens to you. You wake up in it. You sit in it. You watch it pass through the kitchen window, and you have very little say in what it brings. Some days the weather is kind. Some days it is not. And on the days when there is nothing you are needed for, the weather can sit on a man's chest like a heavy quilt that he forgot how to push off. For 9 days, I did not have anywhere I needed to be. I had not realized, until those 9 days, how much of my life had been organized around the shop. The shop got me up in the morning. The shop told me what to wear, what to eat, what to think about while I drove. The shop gave me reasons to go to the hardware store, the lumber yard, the diner on the corner where Marlene knew to bring me a refill before I asked. Without the shop, I was a man with no map. I would wake up at 5:45 out of habit, lie in bed for a while staring at the ceiling, and then get up and put on the same flannel shirt I had worn the day before, because there was nobody to see it and no reason to choose a different one. I did things. I want to be clear about that. I was not lying around the house feeling sorry for myself. A man my age cannot afford to lie around. The body stiffens. The mind narrows. The grief that you can usually outrun by keeping busy catches up to you and sits down at the table and starts eating off your plate. So I kept busy. I cleaned the gutters on the farmhouse, even though I had to do it from a stepladder my doctor would have yelled at me about. I split a cord of firewood for the winter, working slow, taking breaks every 20 minutes. I drove into Bedford to pick up feed for the 2 old laying hens Eleanor had named Margaret and Beatrice the spring before she died, and which I had kept alive out of a kind of stubborn loyalty to a woman who was not there to feed them anymore. I went to the cemetery twice that week. The second time I went was on a Thursday afternoon, when the wind had a bite in it that said winter was not far off. I parked the truck at the bottom of the hill and walked up, slow, because my hip was still complaining from the attic stairs. The cemetery sits behind the Baptist church on a rise that looks out over the valley, and on a clear day you can see the peaks of Otter Blue and Gentle in the distance. Eleanor had picked the spot herself, back when the doctor first told us the news. She had said she wanted to be somewhere I could come and not feel hemmed in. I had brought a thermos of coffee. I poured a cup for myself and sat down on the granite bench her sister Mary had paid for, and I poured a little splash on the ground next to her headstone, the way I had been doing every visit for the last 4 years. Eleanor had loved coffee. She had drunk it strong and black, the way I drink it. And at the end, when she could not keep much down, she had still asked for a sip of mine in the mornings just to taste it. I sat there a while and talked to her, out loud. I do not care if that sounds strange. I have been talking to my wife out loud for 4 years, and I have decided I am too old to apologize for it. I told her about the chisels. I told her about the attic. I told her about the woman with the glasses and the wooden blocks. I told her about the brochure that said, "A Whitaker and Son Company, established 1983. And I told her how my hand had felt when I picked that brochure up, and how it had felt when I set it back down. I told her I had signed the papers. I had not told her that yet. I had been putting it off, even out loud, even in the cemetery, because saying it to her felt like making it true in a way I had not quite been ready for. But that Thursday I told her. I sat on the granite bench with my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee and I said, "Ellie, I signed it. I gave him the shop. I gave him operational authority, and I gave him signature, and I gave him the right to box up my tools and call it a museum. I knew he was going to fail, and I signed it anyway because I love him too much to make him hate me." The wind moved through the dry grass. A crow called somewhere over by the church. Eleanor did not answer me, because Eleanor has not answered me in 4 years. But I have learned that the silence she leaves behind is its own kind of answer. It is the silence of a woman who is letting you arrive at the thing you already know. After a while, I said, I think I made a mistake. Ellie. The wind moved again. I said, I think I have been making this mistake for 30 years and just dressing it up differently each time. That was the hardest sentence I said all week, and I want to tell you why. When Daniel was about 10 years old, he came to me in the shop one Saturday morning and asked if he could help. I gave him a piece of pine and a coping saw, and I set him up at a low stool by the window, and I told him to cut a circle. He worked on that circle for 2 hours. When he showed it to me, the circle was crooked. The line wandered off course in 3 places, and there was a little chip out of the edge where the blade had bit too deep. I should have said, Son, that is the best first circle a boy your age can cut, and I am proud of you. What I said was, try it again. Look at the line. Slow down. He tried it again. It came out a little better, I said. Slow down more. He tried it again. He was getting frustrated. His hands were shaking. He cut himself. Just a little. Just enough to bring a bead of blood up across his knuckle. And he did not say anything because he did not want me to stop the lesson. I saw the blood, and I said, wrap it in a rag and try again. A man who can't bleed a little can't learn. Eleanor came in around lunchtime and saw him crying over the saw, and she did not say a word to me. She picked him up off the stool and carried him into the house and bandaged his hand and gave him a peanut butter sandwich. He did not come back into the shop for 2 months. When he finally did, he did not ask to use the saw. I think about that day a lot. I have been thinking about it more since I signed the papers, because I think what I did to him in the attic, all those years later, with my standards and my white oak and my certainty about the right way to do a thing, was just a longer version of what I did to him with that coping saw. I taught him that being my son meant being measured, and when he got old enough to choose his own measure, he chose one I could not pass. He chose speed. He chose margins. He chose a kind of work that I would never be good at. And he made the shop into a place where I would never be good enough, the way I had once made the shop into a place where he could not be good enough either. We had been doing this to each other for 30 years, just trading sides. I sat at Eleanor's grave a long time with that thought. I did not have anywhere to put it. It was not the kind of thought that fits into action. It was the kind of thought that just sits inside a man's ribs and adjusts how he breathes. After a while, I poured the rest of my coffee out on the grass, and I stood up, slow, with my hip complaining, and I said, I'm going to try to fix it. Ellie, I don't know how yet, but I am going to try. The wind did not answer, but I noticed, walking back down the hill to my truck, that it had stopped biting quite so hard. I drove home through the back roads. I passed a stand of sugar maples that had turned the color of fire, and I passed a field where 2 old plow horses were standing nose to nose against the cold. And I passed the turnoff to Daniel and Rebecca's house. I did not turn off, not that day. I drove home and I made myself a sandwich and I sat at the kitchen table and I ate it slow, and I made a list in my head of the things I would do when I went back to the shop. Number 1, I would not climb to the attic again. Whatever was up there was already up there. Number 2, I would not argue about the south wall. Number 3, I would not say my shop anymore. I had signed that away, and using the words after the fact was just an old man pretending he still had something he did not. Number 4, I would find one thing, one small thing, that I could do well, and I would do it well, and I would let that be enough. That was the plan I made. It was a good plan. It was a humble plan. And at 69 years old, humble plans are usually the only kind that work. It lasted 6 days. On the 7th day, the temperature in Bedford County dropped 22 degrees in 8 hours, and I stood at my kitchen window watching the frost climb up the glass. And I knew the lumber Daniel had shipped to the Blue Ridge Hotel was already starting to move. The shipment went out on a Thursday. I know that because Daniel called me that morning. Not to tell me the shipment had gone out, but to ask if I knew where the old hand-painted Whitaker shop sign was. The one with the gold leaf lettering my daddy had paid a man in Lynchburg to make in 1968. He wanted to hang it in the lobby of the Blue Ridge Hotel as part of the installation. A heritage touch, he called it. Something that would tell the buyers there was a story behind the brand. I told him the sign was in my barn, under a canvas tarp, where it had been since 2012 when we took it down to repaint the storefront. I told him he was welcome to come get it. He said he would send one of the guys. That afternoon, a young man I had never seen drove up in a white van and loaded the sign into the back without ever coming up to the house to say hello. I watched him from the kitchen window. He handled the sign carelessly. He let the bottom edge drag on the gravel for a second before he caught it. I did not go out. I thought about going out. I decided not to. That was the first sign, no joke intended, that something inside me had started to change. The old me would have been out that door before the boy could touch a corner of the wood. The old me would have rewrapped the sign in proper blankets, would have given him a lecture about handling lacquered surfaces, would have made him sit in the kitchen until I had instructed him on how to hang gold leaf without scuffing it. The new me. The man I had been turning into since I sat in that attic with my chisels in cardboard boxes, just watched and let it go. I am not sure that was wisdom. I think it might have just been tired. That night the cold front rolled in. I had been watching the weather all week. A man my age, who has worked wood his whole life, learns to read the weather the way a sailor reads the sky. Not by the numbers on the television, which lie about half the time anyway, but by the joints. The hip first, usually, then the lower back. Then a particular spot in the right shoulder where I tore a tendon in 1991 lifting a slab of black walnut I had no business lifting alone. When all 3 of those start talking at once, I know a front is coming, and I know how hard it is going to hit. That Thursday evening, all 3 of them were singing. I made a pot of beef stew. I had not planned to make stew, but the cold had crept into the kitchen by 5 o'clock, and my hands wanted something to do that involved a knife and a cutting board. And the chest freezer in the mudroom had a package of stew meat from the side of beef I had bought from the Hudsons over in Good the year before. So I made stew. I cut the carrots thick, the way Eleanor used to cut them, and I let the onions caramelize a little longer than the recipe called for, because Eleanor had taught me that a stew is only as good as the patience you put into the onions. While the stew was simmering, I went out on the porch to look at the sky. The sky was the color of a steel chisel. There were no clouds. Exactly. There was just a hard, flat grayness that meant the moisture in the air had given up and gone somewhere else. The maples in the yard had already dropped most of their leaves, and the ones that were still hanging on were rattling in a wind that had not quite arrived yet, but was on its way. I stood there in my flannel and a wool jacket I had owned since the Carter administration, and I watched the temperature drop in real time. You could feel it. You could feel the air thin out, the way a room feels thinner when somebody you love walks out of it. I went back inside. I called Daniel. He did not pick up. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I left a message. I tried to keep my voice steady, the way a man keeps his voice steady when he is trying not to sound like he is delivering bad news. Son, it's Dad. The temperature is dropping faster than the forecast called for. I am looking at 15 by midnight, single digits by morning. If those pieces are in the hotel without proper acclimation, you are going to want to send somebody up there tomorrow with a moisture meter, just to check the joints. Call me when you get this. I hung up. I went back to my stew. I ate a bowl standing at the counter, the way I have been eating most of my dinners since Eleanor passed, because sitting at the table by myself feels worse than standing. He did not call back that night. I went to bed at 9:30. I lay awake until almost midnight, listening to the wind move around the house. The farmhouse is over 120 years old. It has settled into a kind of conversation with the wind by now. A creaking and ticking in the joists that means everything is doing what it is supposed to do. I listened to that conversation a long time. I thought about the buffet that was going into the corner of the Blue Ridge Hotel lobby. I thought about the engineered substrate. I thought about the keypad on the side of the CNC machine, the one with the German name I could not pronounce. And I thought about all the things a machine knows how to measure, and all the things it does not. A machine can measure the temperature of a room. It can measure the humidity. It can measure the density of a board, the moisture content of a slab, the kilonewtons of force required to break a particular joint. A machine can measure all of those things faster and more accurately than a man can. But a machine cannot stand on a porch in October and feel the air thin out. A machine cannot read a sky the color of a chisel and know what is coming. A machine cannot feel, in 3 different joints, that a front is going to hit harder than the forecast says. A machine cannot lie awake at midnight worrying about a buffet 2 hours away in a hotel lobby, because a machine has never built a buffet for a man it cared about, and it has never put its hand on the grain of a board and asked the board whether it was ready. These are the things a man knows that a machine does not, and I have come to believe, in my old age, that almost everything worth knowing in this life falls into that category. Not facts, not measurements, the feeling of the air thinning out, the grain under the palm, the way your son's voice goes soft right before he asks you for something he is afraid to ask for. These are the things that make a life. These are the things a machine cannot do for you. And these are the things a man gives away. Sometimes, when he gets tired enough, or scared enough, or hopeful enough. I fell asleep eventually. I dreamed about Eleanor. In the dream, we were standing in the lumberyard behind the shop, and she was wearing the blue dress she had worn to my daddy's funeral, and she was pointing at the stack of white oak boards under the 3rd shelter. She did not say anything. She just pointed. And then she looked at me, and she shook her head. Not angry, not sad, just the way she used to shake her head when I had missed something obvious. And she was giving me one more chance to see it before she said it out loud. I woke up at 4:15 in the morning to the phone ringing on the nightstand. It was Daniel. His voice was wrong. That is the first thing I noticed. His voice did not sound like the voice of a man who runs a shop. It sounded like the voice of a boy who has broken something he does not know how to put back together. Dad. Son, what's wrong? Dad, I need you to come down here. Down where? The shop, Pierce called. He's driving up from Richmond. He's going to be here at 9. There was a long pause. I sat up in bed. My hip was screaming at me. My right hand was already reaching for the lamp. Daniel, what happened? He told me in short sentences, the way a man tells you bad news when he is trying not to fall apart on the phone. The hotel manager had called him at 3 in the morning. The cold front had hit the building harder than the HVAC could compensate for. The buffet in the lobby had cracked across the top. Not split. Cracked. A long fissure had opened along the joint between the two main panels, running almost the full length of the piece. The bedroom suites in the 4 model rooms had begun to bow at the corners. The headboards were pulling away from the side rails. The veneer was lifting in 3 places. 40 units. Hundreds of pieces. And the cold was supposed to get worse overnight. The second front was coming in behind the first, and the building manager had already started moving the lobby furniture out before more damage could happen. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. When he was done, I asked one question. Did Pierce see it yet? His project manager is already there. They sent her up last night when the manager called. She has been sending him photographs since 4 o'clock. Where are you, son? I'm in the shop. I came in. I don't know what I'm doing here. I just came in. I told him I would be there in 20 minutes. I hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment in the dark. I could hear the wind outside, harder now than it had been at midnight. The second front was already arriving. The frost on the inside of the bedroom window was thick enough that I could not see the yard through it. I want to tell you something about that moment, because I think it is important. I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel any of the small, ugly satisfactions that a man might be expected to feel when his son finally finds out that the father was right. What I felt was a kind of grief. Because I knew, sitting on the edge of that bed at 4:20 in the morning, with my hip screaming and the wind beating against the storm windows, that the next 48 hours were going to ask something of me that I had not been asked for in a long time. They were going to ask me to be the man I had been before I started letting go. They were going to ask me to stand up and to walk into that shop and to use everything I knew on behalf of a son who had told me my knowledge was outdated. I was not sure I had it in me anymore. I sat on that bed for maybe 3 minutes. Then I got up. I put on my work clothes, the real ones, the canvas pants and the heavy flannel and the leather apron that had been hanging on a peg by the back door for almost 2 months. I poured the rest of last night's coffee into a thermos. I put on my boots, and I went out into the dark, into the wind, with the truck idling and the heater blowing white into the cab. And I drove to the shop. The dream came back to me on the way, Eleanor in the blue dress, pointing at the white oak. I think I started to understand, on that drive, what she had been trying to tell me. I got to the shop at 4:45 in the morning. The lights were on. Daniel's truck was parked sideways across 2 spaces by the front door. the way a man parks when his hands have stopped listening to him. I pulled in next to him, slow, and I sat in the cab for a moment with my own hands on the wheel, gathering myself the way an old man gathers himself before he stands up out of a chair. The wind was bad. It was the kind of wind that finds the gaps in a coat, and the gaps in a face, and the gaps in a building. I could hear it whistling through the eaves of the shop as I got out of the truck. I could hear something else, too. Something I had not heard at the shop in 3 years, which was the small, soft creaking of wood under stress. The lumber under the shelters out back was moving, not splitting, just speaking. The way a healthy stack of properly cured boards speaks when the air around them changes faster than they were expecting. A complaint, but a respectful one. The complaint of a thing that had been raised to know how to handle weather. I walked around to the front door. It opened. The lock had been changed again. Or maybe Daniel had left it unlocked. I did not know. I stepped inside. The shop was lit up, all the fluorescents on, humming. The big sliding doors at the back were closed against the wind, but the cold had already crept in along the floor, and the propane heater in the corner was running so hard I could smell the burn of the element. Daniel was standing in the middle of the floor, in front of the CNC machine, holding a phone to his ear and not saying anything into it. He had not shaved. He was wearing the same wool coat as before, but the buttons were done up wrong, and that small detail told me more about his state of mind than any words could have. He saw me. He held up one finger. He kept listening. I did not wait for him to finish. I walked past him, slow, past the CNC machine, past the design counter with the wooden stain blocks still laid out from yesterday, past the heritage display where my bench used to live, and I went straight to the loading dock at the back. The shipment had come back. I want you to understand what that looked like, because the shape of it told me everything I needed to know before I touched a single piece. 40 units, disassembled and crated for the return. Some of the crates had been opened. Pieces were laid out across the loading dock floor and onto the gravel beyond the open bay doors, dragged out, I assume, by whoever had been there before me trying to figure out what had failed. There were headboards leaning against the wall with their side rails pulled away from them. There were buffet tops laid flat on sawhorses with long cracks running their length. The cracks dark with the cold and still slowly widening as I watched. There were dining table extensions warped into shallow bowls. There were veneer corners lifting like the dried skin on the heel of an old man's foot. And underneath all of it, on the concrete floor, there was a fine layer of that powdery gray-brown dust I had run my finger through 3 weeks ago. The dust of engineered board breaking down. The dust of a kind of wood that had never been a tree, going back to its first state, which is not wood, but nothing. I stood at the edge of the loading dock and I looked at it. I did not say a word. I did not need to. Anything I could have said would have just been me using language to keep the truth at arm's length. And the truth was already inside the building with us, and it was breathing. After a minute, I felt Daniel come up beside me. He had hung up the phone. He stood there next to me, not quite shoulder to shoulder, the way a son stands next to a father when he does not know what kind of weather is coming from the older man. For a long time, neither of us said anything. Finally, he said, "How bad is it, Dad?" I did not answer right away. I walked down the steps onto the dock floor. My boots scuffed through the dust. I knelt down beside one of the buffet tops, slow, with my hips screaming again, and I laid my palm flat against the wood, the way a doctor lays a palm against a patient's forehead. The wood was cold, colder than the room. That alone told me the panel had been holding moisture that had migrated outward and frozen on the surface, which meant the substrate had been wicking water for days before the cold ever hit. The crack ran from one corner to the other, jagged, following nothing in particular, because there was no grain in the panel for it to follow. Engineered board does not have grain. It has direction. Real wood has grain. Grain is what tells a crack where to go, what to honor, where to stop. Without grain, a crack just goes wherever the failure is weakest, which is everywhere at once. I stood up. My knee popped. I did not bother to hide it. It is as bad as it can be. Son, I said, every piece in this shipment is going to fail in the same way over the next 6 weeks. The ones that are not cracked yet are going to crack. The ones that are not bowing yet are going to bow. The veneer is going to lift off in sheets by Christmas. There is nothing you can repair. There is nothing you can refinish. This whole order has to be remade. He stood there. He did not argue. That was the moment, I think, when I understood that something had changed in him. Because the Daniel of 3 weeks ago would have argued. He would have brought up the German engineering. He would have shown me a brochure. He would have told me about the moisture rating and the climate-controlled environment. The Daniel standing next to me on the loading dock at 5 in the morning did none of those things. He just nodded, slowly, once. Pierce is going to cancel, he said. His voice was flat. He told me at 3:30. He said he is driving up himself because his lawyer told him to look me in the eye before they file. I let that sit between us. Dad, I don't know what to do. I want to tell you the truth about what I felt when he said that. I felt my chest open up. I am not proud of it. I felt the small, mean pleasure of being needed again, after weeks of being put in a box, and I felt the warmth of my son saying out loud the words he had spent 3 years refusing to say. I don't know what to do. And underneath that pleasure I felt a deeper thing, a thing that was harder to look at, which was the recognition that I had been waiting for him to say those words. I had been waiting for him to fail. Not maliciously, not even consciously. But somewhere underneath all the love and all the worry and all the long nights at the cemetery, there had been a small part of me that had wanted to be proved right, that had wanted to be needed in this exact way, in this exact moment, on this exact loading dock. I want to confess that to you because I think it is important. I think we tell ourselves, when we are old, that we want our children to succeed, and we mean it. We mean it most of the time. But there is a small, dark seed in every father I have ever known, including me, that wants the boy to come home with his hat in his hand and ask for help. And when we get what we wanted, we discover that the wanting was uglier than we had let ourselves see. I stood there on the loading dock with that knowledge in my chest, and I knew that whatever I did in the next 48 hours, I could not do it from that place. If I came back to the shop to save my son's contract, but I did it with that small, mean seed feeding me, the saving would not be worth anything. It would be just another version of the man I had been at the coping saw. The The man who taught his boy that being a Whitaker meant being measured. So I stood there a long minute and I let that seed die. I do not know how to describe what that felt like, except to say that it felt like a door closing very quietly somewhere inside me. A door I had been holding open without knowing it. When it closed, the room behind it got smaller, and the room I was standing in got bigger, and there was more space in me, suddenly, for the work that was coming. I turned to my son. Daniel, listen to me. I need you to do 3 things, and I need you to do them in the next hour. I need you to call Pierce back and ask him to bring his project manager with him when he comes. I need you to go up to the attic and bring me down the box marked Dad's chisels, and the one marked Dad's planes, and the one marked Dad's marking gauges. And I need you to put on a pot of coffee, because we are going to be here a while. He looked at me. For just a second, I saw him try to make a sentence about how he had thought he had this, about how he just needed time, about how the substrate was supposed to. Then he stopped himself. He swallowed it. Yes, sir, he said. He had not called me sir in 28 years. I watched him walk back into the shop. His shoulders different now, lower, the way a man's shoulders go when he has stopped trying to carry the wrong thing. I stayed out on the loading dock another minute. The wind was still bad. The crack in the buffet top was still widening, slow, with a tiny sound like ice on a pond at the first thaw. I walked past it, past the failed shipment, past the dust, out the open bay door, into the gray dawn, across the gravel, all the way to the back of the property, to the 3rd shelter under the tin roof. The white oak was waiting. I laid my hand on the top board. The wood was cold, but it was the right kind of cold. The kind that belongs to a tree that has come down honestly and dried slowly and is ready to do the work it was raised for. I stood there a long time. I thought about Eleanor in the blue dress, pointing. I thought about Lily, asleep right then in her little bedroom 6 miles away. The granddaughter I had been keeping these boards for. The granddaughter whose wedding day was somewhere out there, in a future I might or might not live to see. I thought about the chest I had been planning to build for her. The cedar-lined hope chest of quarter-sawn white oak, with hand-cut dovetails and a top that lifted on brass hinges I had already bought. The chest that was supposed to carry her into her own marriage and her own life, with my hands' work as her foundation. And I made the trade. I made the trade out loud, so the tree would hear me, and so Eleanor would hear me, and so the part of myself that was still listening would hear me. I am sorry. Sugar, I said, to Lily, to the tree, to the wife who was buried on a hill 3 miles east of where I was standing. I'm going to take some of these boards, today. I'm going to use them for your daddy. I will save what I can for you. But the family name comes first, and the family name is the only thing I have left to give you that is worth more than a chest. The wind moved through the tin roof. The boards spoke that small, respectful complaint again. And then they were quiet. I picked up the top board. It was heavier than I remembered. My back complained. My hip complained. I did not care. I walked it across the gravel yard, into the shop, past the CNC machine and the design counter and the heritage display, and I set it down on the workbench that used to be mine. Daniel was standing there with 3 cardboard boxes at his feet, and his hand was on the lid of the top one, and his eyes were on the board I had just set down. and I watched my son begin to understand, for the first time in his life, what it meant to ask his father for help. The clock on the wall said 5:45. Harlan Pierce would be there in 3 hours and 15 minutes. I rolled up my sleeves. The first thing I did, when Daniel came back down from the attic with the boxes, was take the lid off the one marked Dad's chisels and pick up the oldest one, the Sheffield blade, the one with the beech handle dark as a bay horse from 100 years of palm sweat. I did not put it on the bench. I held it. Daniel was watching me. I could feel him watching. He had been watching me since the moment I walked back in from the lumber shelter with that white oak board in my arms, and he had not stopped. And I knew without looking at him that he was waiting for something. Some kind of signal. Some kind of permission. The way a boy waits at the edge of a room he is not sure he is allowed back into. I held the chisel up to the light. I turned it slowly. The bevel was still clean. I had honed it myself 2 months before I climbed those attic stairs the first time. And the steel had been good then, and the steel was good now, because good steel does not forget who taught it. I ran my thumb along the back of the blade, looking for any pitting. There was none. He had wrapped it well. I owed him that. He had not understood why he was wrapping it, but he had wrapped it like a man who had been raised by somebody who would have noticed if he had not. I set the chisel down on the bench, carefully, in the place where the rack used to be on the south wall, with the handle pointing toward where my right hand would come up off the bench. Then I turned to my son. Daniel, I am going to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. Not as a businessman, not as the man who runs this shop, as my boy. He nodded. He did not speak. I noticed his jaw was set the way it used to set when he was 12, when he was bracing for something he thought was going to hurt. How many of those 40 units used a single piece of solid lumber in any structural component? He did not answer right away. He looked at the floor. He looked at the bench. He looked back at me. None of them, Dad. All veneer over substrate. Yes, sir. And the joinery. Dowels and biscuits, glue and pins. No mortise and tenon. No, sir. No dovetails. No, sir. I did not say anything for a moment. I let the answers sit in the room, not as accusations, just as facts. Facts have a particular weight when you let them stand by themselves, without dressing them up. Daniel knew that. He had grown up in a house where his mother and I had taught him that facts were stronger than feelings, and that you did not need to push on a true thing to make it land. All right, I said. Then here is what we are going to do, and I want you to listen to all of it before you ask a single question. We do not have time for questions until I am done. Yes, sir. Pierce is going to be here at 9. That gives us a little under 4 hours. I am not going to try to fix any of those 40 units. They cannot be fixed. What I am going to do is build one piece, a sample, a buffet, the same size and proportions as the one that cracked in the hotel lobby. I am going to build it out of the white oak I just brought in. I am going to use mortise and tenon at every structural joint. I am going to dovetail the case sides. I am going to make it the way I would have made it 40 years ago. And I am going to do it in front of him, with my hands. And I am going to let him see what the difference is. Daniel was quiet a long moment. Then he said, "Dad, you can't build a buffet in 4 hours." "No, I cannot. I'm going to build the carcass, the case, the bones. I will mark the dovetails. I will cut the tenons. I will dry fit it. I will not finish it. I will not put a top on it. I am going to show him the architecture, the thing underneath the thing. The reason this fails and that does not. Because what Pierce is canceling on, son, is not a buffet. It is a story. And the only way to give him a new story is to put one in front of him with our hands." He swallowed. He looked at the board on the bench. He looked at the chisel. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to go back out to the third shelter and bring in 3 more boards. Not the 8-footers, the 10-footers. Stack them by the bench. Then I need you to find me the marking gauge. Not the modern one. The wooden one with the brass shoe. It is in the box you brought down. After that, I need you to make coffee and call your wife and tell her you are going to be at the shop all day." "Dad." "What?" He looked at me. For a long moment, he looked at me. I could see him trying to find the words. I could see him losing them. I could see him try again. Finally, he said something I did not expect. "I'm sorry. I had not been ready for that. I want to be honest about that. I had imagined, in the last 3 weeks, what it might sound like if my son ever said those 2 words to me. And I had imagined it many ways. But I had never imagined that he would say them at 5 in the morning on a loading dock floor that was still dusty with the failure of his own decisions. And I had never imagined that they would arrive without any other words around them. No explanation, no qualifications, no "I'm sorry, but," or "I'm sorry if," or "I'm sorry that you," just "I'm sorry." I looked at him. My eyes filled up a little. I did not let them spill. He did not need that from me right then. He needed his father to be a man with steady hands and a clear plan. And the kindest thing I could do for him in that moment was to be both of those things and to let his apology stand where he had put it, without picking it up and turning it into a conversation that would have given both of us somewhere to hide. "I know you are, son," I said. "Go get the boards." He went. I stood at the bench alone for a minute. I put my hand on the top board. I closed my eyes. I asked Eleanor to give me what was left in these hands. I asked her to lend me whatever steadiness she had been holding for me on the other side of wherever she was. I do not know if she heard me. I do not know if there is a place where she could hear me from. But I have learned, in 4 years of asking, that the asking itself is what does the work. The asking sets a man's shoulders. The asking puts him in the right kind of mood for the work he is about to do. When I opened my eyes again, my hip was still talking to me, but my hands were not shaking. I started measuring. I want to take a minute and tell you about measuring. I think most people who have not done this work imagine that measuring is the boring part, the setup, the thing you have to do before the real work begins. They imagine the real work is the cutting, the shaping, the thing the chisel does to the board. They are wrong. Measuring is the work. Cutting is just the consequence of measuring. A man who measures right cuts well, because the line tells him where to go. A man who measures wrong cannot cut well, no matter how sharp his blade or how steady his hand, because he is following a lie. Every piece of furniture I have ever seen fail, in 43 years of looking at failed furniture, has failed because somebody measured wrong somewhere upstream of the cut. Not because the wood was bad, not because the joinery was weak, because somebody, at some point, did not respect the line. I picked up the wooden marking gauge, the one with the brass shoe. My daddy had made it for me in 1976, the year I came back from the army and decided I was going to take over his shop after all. The shoe was worn smooth, the pin was sharp. The little wooden screw that locked the fence in place had a small initial carved into it. A W, my daddy's mark, which he put on every tool he made for me. The way a man marks the things he gives away to children he loves. I set the fence to 1 3/4 inches. I locked it. I laid the gauge against the edge of the first board, and I drew a line. The line came up clean. White oak takes a marking gauge the way a good horse takes a bit, willing and even and without resentment. Daniel came back in with 3 more boards. He stacked them where I had told him. He stood there a moment, watching me mark. He did not say anything. I think he understood, the way I think a son sometimes understands, that he was watching something he had not been allowed to watch before. Not because it had been hidden from him, but because he had not, until that morning, known how to look. I moved the fence, 3/4 of an inch, drew a second line, parallel to the first. The 2 lines together would define the cheek of the first tenon I was going to cut. "What are those for?" Daniel asked. Quiet. The way a child asks. "These 2 lines are the cheek of a mortise and tenon joint. The tenon is the piece that sticks out. The mortise is the hole it goes into. The joint is what holds a buffet together for 100 years instead of 6 weeks. How long does it take to cut one?" "A good one, with sharp tools, about 40 minutes. He counted in his head. I watched him counting. I watched him realize how many joints I was going to need to cut before 9 o'clock. "Dad, can I help?" I looked at him. My boy, 41 years old. The lines around his eyes deeper this morning than they had been 3 weeks ago. The way a man's lines get deeper in a single night when the night does enough work on him. "Yes, son, you can help. Go put on a leather apron. There is a spare in the office, on the back of the door. The one your mother bought me for Christmas in 2001. I have never worn it. I was saving it." He went to find it. I heard him in the office, opening the closet. I heard him pause, the way a man pauses when he finds something he was not expecting. When he came back, he was wearing the apron, and his eyes were a little red, and he did not say anything about whatever he had felt when he had taken it off the hook. And I did not ask him. We started working. We worked in silence for the first hour. That was the right way to do it. Silence is what a workshop needs in the early going of a hard job. Talk gets in the way. Talk tells the hands to slow down, because the brain is somewhere else. The hands need the brain to be in the same room with them, watching them, listening to them, paying attention to the small sounds the wood makes when the blade enters it. A chisel that is cutting right makes a particular sound. A chisel that is cutting wrong makes a different sound. A man who is talking does not hear either one. So we did not talk. I marked. Daniel watched. I cut. Daniel held the board steady. I taught him, without words, where to put his hands, and he learned, without words, where to put them. I would not have believed 3 weeks before, that we could work together like that. I would have told you that my son and I had lost the ability to be in the same room without filling it with disagreement. But there is something about a deadline, and about a failure that has names and addresses, that strips away the chatter and leaves only the work. By 6:30, I had cut the first 4 tenons. Daniel had laid out the second set of boards on the bench and was watching me square the next mortise. The propane heater had warmed the shop enough that I could feel my hands again, properly, the way a craftsman needs to feel them, with the small, specific awareness of the fingertips that tells you what kind of grip you have on the handle. At 6:45 I stopped, and I straightened up, and my back made a sound that I will not try to write down because there is no honest way to put it on paper. And I put my hand on the bench to steady myself. Daniel was at my elbow in a second. "Dad, sit down." "I'm all right." "Dad, sit." He pulled the wooden stool out from under the bench and he put his hand on my shoulder and he eased me down onto it. I let him. I want to tell you what that meant. I had not let my son put his hands on me to help me with my own body, since he was a child, and I was the one putting my hands on him. There is a particular threshold a man crosses when he lets his grown son help him sit down. Some men cross it kicking, some men cross it grateful. Some men, like me, cross it both ways at once, with the kicking down deep where nobody can see it, and the gratitude up on top where the boy needs to find it. I sat. I breathed. My hip was telling me something that I was going to need to listen to later, when I had time. But I did not have time right then. Daniel poured a cup of coffee from the pot he had made an hour ago. He brought it to me. He stood there while I drank it. He did not say anything. He did not have to. After a minute, he said, "Dad, will you teach me what you're doing?" I looked up at him. The light over the bench was on, and the rest of the shop was in shadow, and his face was half lit. The way a face looks in a Rembrandt painting where the painter has decided to honor the half that is willing to be seen. "What part?" "All of it. Whatever you can fit in. I know we don't have time, but while you're working, I want to know what you're doing and why. Not the steps. Anybody can learn the steps. I want to know the reasons." I drank the rest of the coffee. I set the cup down. I stood up, slow, with my hands on the bench. "All right. Sharpen the chisel for me first. The one I'm using. Take it to the stone in the corner. 8 strokes flat. 8 strokes on the bevel. Light pressure. Do not let the bevel rock. Bring it back to me when the edge will shave the hair off the back of your forearm." He went. While he was at the stone, with his head down and his hands moving the way I had moved mine 10,000 times in that same corner, I started to teach him. I taught him the way my daddy had taught me. Out loud, while my hands kept working. I told him that the white oak we were cutting had been a tree on this land for somewhere between 200 and 220 years, depending on how you counted the early growth. I told him that a tree that old has lived through more than I had lived through and more than he would ever live through, and that when you cut it down and bring it into a building, you owe it the respect of using its life for something that will last. I told him that engineered board is not disrespectful because it is engineered. It is disrespectful because it pretends to be wood when it is not. A thing that is honest about what it is can be used for anything. A thing that lies about what it is will fail you on the day you most need it not to. He came back with the chisel. He held it up. I tested the edge against the hair on my forearm. It would shave. Not perfectly, but enough. Good. Now watch. I cut the next tenon while he watched. I talked while I cut. I told him about reading the grain. I told him that every board has a direction it wants to be cut in, and a direction it does not, and that you have to ask the board. By looking at the way the grain rises and falls under the surface, which direction it would prefer. I told him that the wood is always smarter than the man, because the wood has been doing this for 200 years, and the man has only been doing it for 40. The man's job is not to dominate the wood. The man's job is to listen to the wood and then make a small, respectful suggestion about what they might do together. He listened. I want you to understand how he listened. He listened the way I had listened to my daddy when I was 19 years old and home from the army with no plan and no future. And my daddy had told me, in this same shop, that the smartest thing a young man could do was apprentice himself to a thing that was older than he was. I had not been ready to hear him at 19. It had taken me another 10 years to be ready. Daniel was 41. He had a head start on me, although he did not yet know it. By 7:15, I had cut 6 tenons and 3 mortises. Daniel had cut his first one, under my supervision, on a piece of scrap I had set aside for that purpose. It was a clumsy tenon. The shoulders were not quite square. There was a small chip on the back face where his chisel had bitten too deep at the end. He held it up. He looked at it. I watched his face. I saw him do the thing every craftsman does on his first real cut, which is to look at the work and see only the flaws. I have done that for 43 years. Every craftsman I have ever respected does that for 43 years. It is a curse, and it is a gift, and there is no separating one from the other. It's terrible, he said. It's a first tenon, son. It's not terrible. It's first. Dad, the shoulders. I see the shoulders. Cut another one. The shoulders will come. He cut another one. It was better. The shoulders were squarer. There was still a small chip on the back. He held it up. He looked at me. Better, I said. Cut a third. He cut a third. The shoulders were square. There was no chip. The wedge of the tenon came off the scrap clean, in a single curl that spiraled down to the floor and lay there like a wood shaving from 100 years ago. He held it up. He did not say anything. He looked at me. His eyes were wet. I want to tell you what I felt looking at my son's third tenon. I felt the same thing I had felt when he was 3 years old, and he had written his name for the first time, large and uneven and proud, on a piece of butcher paper with a crayon Eleanor had given him at the kitchen table. I felt the same thing I had felt when he was 11, and he had brought home a science fair ribbon for a model of the solar system he had built out of papier-mâché and a wire coat hanger. I felt the same thing I had felt when he was 22, and he had walked across the stage at the University of North Carolina in a black gown and a flat cap. And he had looked out into the crowd and found me, and he had nodded. I felt a father's joy. But I felt something else, too, that I had not felt at any of those earlier moments. I felt the particular joy of a master watching an apprentice make his first true cut. It is a different joy than father's joy. It is older. It connects back through the generations in a different way. It is the joy that my daddy must have felt when he watched me cut my first dovetail in 1973, and the joy his daddy must have felt when he watched my daddy cut his first one in 1949. And so on back through the chain of Whitaker men who had been holding chisels in this part of Virginia since the 1880s. When my great-grandfather had come down from a sawmill in West Virginia with a wagon full of tools, and a wife and a baby, and no clear plan beyond a willingness to work. I had not realized, until that morning, that I had been waiting 41 years to feel that joy. "Cut another," I said. My voice was not quite steady. He pretended not to notice, which was the kindest thing he could have done. He cut another, and another. By 7:45, he had cut 6 tenons that would have passed any inspection I could have given them. I had cut 9 more myself. The carcass of the buffet was starting to come together on the bench in front of us, in pieces, not yet assembled, but recognizable. A long bottom panel, 2 case sides, 2 top stretchers, the vertical divider that would split the interior into left and right, the dovetailed corners of the back frame, marked but not yet cut. I had told Daniel 4 hours and a sample. We had been working 3 hours, and we had the bones of 1. I am telling you this not to brag. I am telling you because I want you to understand that when 2 men work side by side, in silence, on a thing they both finally agree matters, the work moves faster than either of them could have moved alone. There is a multiplier in that kind of cooperation that has nothing to do with the number of hands. It has to do with the alignment of intention. 2 men aligned can do, in 3 hours, what 1 man could not do in 8. I had forgotten that. I had been working alone in that shop, in one way or another, for almost 3 years. I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone next to me whose hands were trying to do the same thing my hands were trying to do. It was a feeling I had not known I had been missing until it came back. All at once, on a cold Friday morning with the wind beating against the bay doors and the sample buffet rising out of a stack of white oak boards that had been waiting for this work for 5 years. At 7:50, Daniel set down his chisel and looked at me. "Dad," he said, "I'm going to call Pierce. I'm going to tell him to come at 10 instead of 9. I think we can do better with another hour." I looked at him. I looked at the bench. I looked at the work. "Make the call, son." He went to find his phone. I sat down on the stool for a minute, because my hip was telling me I had to. I put my hand flat on the white oak. The grain was warm now, from the heat of our hands and from the heat of the shop, and you could see the medullary rays under the light, those small bright flecks that quarter-sawn white oak gives you when it has been cut right, the flecks that look like little flashes of mica in the surface of the wood. It is the most beautiful surface in the world, in my opinion. It has been the most beautiful surface in the world for 200 years, and it will be the most beautiful surface in the world for 200 more, long after every CNC machine in this country has been replaced 3 times over by something faster. I closed my eyes. I said, quietly, "Thank you, Ellie." The wind beat against the bay doors. The shop was warm. My son's voice was talking to a wealthy man in Richmond, somewhere across the room, asking for an hour. I picked the chisel back up. We still had a buffet to finish. Harlan Pierce arrived at 10 minutes after 10. He drove a dark green pickup truck. Not a new one. A 1998 Ford F-250 with a faded dent on the rear panel that he had never had repaired. Because, As he told me once over coffee about 15 years ago, a man should not be ashamed of evidence that he has used a thing. He pulled into the gravel yard, slow, the way a man pulls into a place where he is not yet sure what he is going to find. And he parked next to my truck instead of next to Daniel's, which I noticed, and which I did not think was an accident. His project manager came in a separate car, a woman in her early 40s, named Karen Vasquez, in a wool coat and a scarf and the kind of leather boots that mean a woman has been on enough job sites to know what boots are for. I had met her twice before, at site visits, and she had always been straight with me, which is the highest compliment I know how to pay a person in business. I saw them through the bay door window. I did not stop working. I had 10 more minutes of work I wanted to do before I let myself be interrupted, and I had decided, sometime in the last hour, that I was not going to greet them at the door. Daniel could greet them at the door. Daniel had run this shop for 3 years. Daniel was the man whose name was on the operating authority. Whatever was going to be said between him and Pierce in the first 5 minutes of this conversation needed to be said without me standing next to him. Because if I stood next to him, Pierce would say it to me. And I had not earned that. Daniel had earned it. The bad version of it. But he had earned it. So I kept working. I was cutting the last of the through dovetails on the back frame, the way my daddy had taught me, with a coping saw to remove the bulk of the waste and a sharp, narrow chisel to clean up the corners. The dovetails would not be visible in the finished piece. They would be hidden behind the back panel. I was cutting them anyway, because Pierce would ask, when the time came, whether the joints he could not see were as well made as the joints he could see. And I wanted to be able to say yes without lying. Daniel met them at the door. I could hear them, not the words, the shape of the conversation. Pierce's voice, low, slow. The voice of a man who had decided his decisions before he got out of the truck. Karen's voice, professional, measured, asking a question I could not make out. Daniel's voice, lower than I had ever heard it. The voice of a man who has already stopped trying to defend himself and is just trying to keep the conversation moving forward into whatever was going to happen next. After a minute, Daniel led them across the shop floor toward the bench. I straightened up. I set the chisel down. I wiped my hands on the leather apron Eleanor had bought me 25 years ago for a Christmas I had been too distracted to be grateful for at the time. I turned to face them. Pierce stopped about 6 feet from the bench. He looked at me. He looked at the work in front of me. He looked at the work to my left, on the second bench, where the partially assembled carcass of the sample buffet was laid out in its component pieces, the joinery visible, the white oak pale and bright under the work light. He did not say hello. He stood there a long moment, his hands in the pockets of his coat, and he just looked. I have known Harlan Pierce for 22 years. He bought his first piece from me in 2003, a single black walnut conference table for an office building he was developing in Richmond. He had heard about my work from a woman whose mother had a sideboard I had built in 1991, and he had called me on the phone and asked if I would come down to look at the space. I had driven down on a Tuesday. We had spent 4 hours together. By the end of it, we had a handshake agreement. No written contract. Just a handshake. And that handshake had governed everything we did together for the next 22 years. Pierce did not move. Karen had taken out a small notebook and was writing something in it. Daniel was standing about 3 feet behind them, his hands at his sides. the way a son stands behind a father who has gone to talk to the principal. Finally, Pierce spoke. "Thomas," he said, "tell me what I am looking at. I want to tell you something about that question, because the question itself was a gift." Pierce did not ask Daniel what he was looking at. He did not ask Karen. He asked me. And in asking me, he was telling the room, without using the word, who he believed had built it. He was telling Daniel, without making a speech, that the man Pierce had come to talk to was standing on my side of the bench. I did not take the gift. I want to be clear about that. I did not step forward and claim the work. I stepped to my left, half a step, so that Daniel was no longer behind me but beside me, and I waited until he had moved up to my elbow before I answered. "You are looking at the carcass of a buffet," I said. "Quarter-sawn white oak, from a tree on my property that came down in a storm in 2020. The boards have been air-drying under a tin roof for 5 years. The mortises and tenons are cut by hand. The through dovetails on the back frame, which you cannot see from where you are standing, are also cut by hand. There is no fastener in this piece, no screw, no nail, no biscuit, no dowel. When it is finished, it will hold itself together for somewhere between 100 and 150 years, depending on how it is treated." Pierce nodded, slowly, once. "Who cut the joints?" I paused. I had been preparing for that question, and I had been preparing the wrong answer for it. The answer I had prepared while I was working was I did. That was the true answer. I had cut most of them. I had cut all of the first ones. I had cut every joint that I was not sure Daniel could cut clean on his first try, which was almost all of them. But standing there, with my son at my elbow, I understood that the true answer was not the answer I needed to give. "Both of us cut them," I said. "Most of them are mine. Some of them are his. He is learning." Pierce looked at me a long moment. Then he turned his head and looked at Daniel. Not at his face, at his hands. Daniel's hands were not clean. There was sawdust on his knuckles. There was a small line of blood on the side of his right thumb, where he had nicked himself with a chisel about an hour ago, and had not bothered to bandage it. There were 2 small blisters starting on the meat of his palm, in places that meant he had not used his hands like this in a long time. Pierce looked at those hands for what felt like a full minute. Karen kept writing in her notebook. Daniel did not move. Then Pierce turned back to me. "Walk me through it. I want to tell you about the next 40 minutes. Because in those 40 minutes, I did something I had not done in front of a buyer in maybe 20 years, which was to teach. I did not pitch. I did not sell. I did not show Pierce the work and tell him what was good about it. I walked him through it the way I would have walked an apprentice through it. I showed him the grain on the case sides, and I explained why I had oriented the boards the way I had, with the heart side facing in instead of out, so that any movement over time would tighten the joints instead of loosening them. I showed him the tenon shoulders, and I explained how a square shoulder distributes load across the full width of the joint, where a round shoulder concentrates it on a single line and fails first at that line. I showed him the dovetails, the ones he could see and the ones he could not, and I explained why the angle of a dovetail matters more in softwood than in hardwood, and why white oak forgives a slightly wider angle than walnut wood. He listened. He did not interrupt. Karen kept writing. Daniel stood at my elbow and listened too. After about 10 minutes, Daniel started asking small, quiet questions, the way an apprentice asks them, and I answered them while Pierce stood there listening to both sides of the conversation. Halfway through, Pierce put his hand on the case side. Flat. The way I had laid my own hand on the buffet top out on the loading dock 5 hours earlier. He kept it there a long time. I watched him do it. I knew what he was feeling for. He was feeling for what was not there. He was feeling for the absence of the buzz that engineered board has when you lay your hand on it. That small, dry hum of a thing pretending to be a tree. White oak does not have that hum. White oak is warm. White oak is patient. White oak has been alive for 2 centuries, and it does not forget the difference between being alive and being assembled. Pierce took his hand off the wood. He turned to Karen. "What do you think?" Karen finished a sentence in her notebook. She looked up. She looked at me, then at the bench, then at Daniel, and last at Pierce. "I think we have been buying the wrong thing for the last 3 years. Harlan." Pierce nodded. He turned to me. "Thomas, I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to think about it before you answer." "Yes, sir." "If I tear up the existing contract and write a new one for 40 units to be built to the specification I am looking at on this bench, by hand, in this shop, with you as the master of record, can you deliver them by the 1st of June? I thought about it. I had told myself I would think about it before I answered. And I did. The answer was no. If I tried to do it alone, the answer was yes. Barely. If Daniel worked alongside me and we hired 2 of the journeymen who had worked in this shop before the CNC machine came in, both of whom I knew were still in town, and both of whom I knew would come back if I called them. But the answer Pierce was asking for was a different answer than the one his question contained. He was asking whether the shop could deliver. He was asking whether the Whitaker name still meant what it had meant when he first put his hand on a black walnut conference table in 2003. That answer was yes. "Yes, sir," I said. "I can deliver them by the 1st of June, with Daniel as a subordinate to you on the project." I felt my son's shoulder, half an inch from mine, get very still. "No, sir," I said. Pierce raised his eyebrows, just a little. Karen looked up from her notebook. "With my son as my partner on the project," I said, "co-signature, co-responsibility. I will train him on every aspect he does not already know, and I will supervise every joint he cuts. And at the end of this contract, when we sign the next one, I want it to be his name and mine on the same line." Pierce looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Daniel. Daniel was looking at me. I could feel him looking at me. I did not look back. I kept my eyes on Pierce. Pierce nodded. "All right," he said. "I will draw up a new contract. I will have it here by Monday. The terms will reflect the additional cost of solid lumber and hand joinery, which means the contract value is going to be substantially higher than the original. I assume that is acceptable." "It is acceptable," Daniel said. His voice was steady, the first time he had spoken since Pierce had walked through the door. Pierce turned to him. "Daniel, I want to say one thing to you. and then I will leave you with your father, because I think the two of you have more to discuss than I am qualified to be part of." "Yes, sir." "I do not blame you for what happened. Every young man in this country has been told for 20 years that scale is the highest virtue. You did what you were taught. The men who taught you were wrong, but they were loud, and you are not the first man your age I have watched try to follow them. What I will say is this. The reason I am writing you a new contract instead of filing a lawsuit is because your father walked across his own gravel yard at 5 in the morning to make this for me, when he had every right in the world to let you fail. Do not waste that. Do not let him work alone again." Daniel did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "No, sir. I will not." Pierce held out his hand. Daniel shook it. Then Pierce turned to me, and he held out his hand to me, and he held it longer than was usual, and he said, "Thomas, 22 years. 22 years, I said. Let us make it 30 before either one of us is done. I will try, Harlan." He smiled. He nodded once at the buffet. He turned and walked out of the shop, with Karen behind him, writing as she walked. I heard the truck start in the gravel yard. I heard him pull away. The shop was quiet. Daniel and I stood at the bench. Neither of us spoke. After a minute, he sat down on the wooden stool, slow, the way a man sits down when his knees have suddenly remembered they have been standing for 5 hours. He put his face in his hands. I did not touch him. I knew better than to touch him in that moment. I just stood there next to him, with my hand resting on the white oak case side, and I let my boy cry. He cried for a long time. Quiet. Not theatrical. Just the slow, steady release of 3 years of pressure he had not let himself feel, all coming out at once on a stool in a shop where his father had just saved his life. When he was done, he wiped his face on the leather apron Eleanor had bought me. He stood up. He looked at me. "Dad," he said. "I know, son. Will you teach me from the beginning?" I put my hand on his shoulder. The first time I had touched him without him touching me first in maybe 10 years. "Yes," I said, "from the beginning." The shop was quiet for a long time after Pierce left. We did not talk. Daniel sat on the stool. I stayed standing, because I knew if I sat down right, then my hip would not let me get back up without help. And I did not want to ask my son for that particular help on the same morning he had asked me for everything else. So I stood. I kept my hand on the white oak. I let him gather himself. After a while, he stood up too, and he wiped his face one more time, and he said the thing I had been waiting to hear him say without knowing I had been waiting for it. "Dad, I need to go home for a couple of hours." "Go, son." "I need to tell Rebecca." "Tell her what you need to tell her. Then come back. We have a buffet to finish." He nodded. He took the leather apron off. Slow. The way a man takes off a thing that has done him good. He folded it. He laid it on the bench next to the work. He did not say anything else. He walked out the front door, and I heard his truck start, and I heard him pull out of the gravel yard, and the shop was alone with me for the first time in 5 hours. I sat down on the stool. I sat for a long time. I do not know how long. The light through the high windows moved a little. The propane heater clicked off and then clicked back on. I could hear the wind, still bad, but lower now, the second front having mostly blown itself out during the night. Outside the bay door, the gravel yard was lit in a thin gray sunlight that comes only in early winter in this part of Virginia. The kind of light that does not warm anything but makes the colors honest. I want to tell you what I was feeling, because I think it is important that you understand. I was not happy. I want to be specific about that. The kind of moment I had just had with my son, in front of a buyer I respected, with a sample piece I had built with my own hands rising out of the bench beside me, should have been one of the best moments of my life. And in some way, it was. But the feeling sitting in my chest as I sat there alone on that stool was not happiness. It was something heavier than happiness, and slower, and more honest. It was the feeling of having been used the way I was made to be used. That is the closest I can come. It is the feeling a tool has, I think, when somebody finally picks it up and uses it for the thing it was forged to do. A hand plane that has been sitting in a drawer for 10 years. When somebody finally takes it out and lays it on a board and pushes, knows in some part of its iron that it is doing what it was made for. I do not believe a hand plane has a soul. I am not making that argument. But I believe that we make tools in the image of our own wanting, and that when a tool is used right, it gives back to us the feeling of wanting being met. And a man, when his body and his hands and his attention are all being asked for at the same time, by a thing that needs all three of them, gets that same feeling, the feeling of being met. I had not been met like that in a long time. Eleanor had used to meet me that way, just by being in the same room, just by knowing what I was working on without me having to say it, and by asking about it at dinner in the right way, with the right specific question that meant she had been paying attention. She had been gone 4 years, and in those 4 years I had not realized, until that morning, how much of the feeling of being met I had been missing. I sat on the stool and I let myself miss her. It is a strange thing, missing a person you have already been missing for 4 years. Grief, in my experience, does not get smaller the way the books say it does. It gets quieter. It gets less constant. It moves out of the bedroom and into a back room of the house, where you do not see it every day, but you know it is there. And then on a morning like that morning, when something good has happened that she would have wanted to be part of, the back room opens up and she walks out of it and stands beside you, and you feel her not being there with a sharpness you had not felt in months. I sat with her a while. After maybe 20 minutes, I got up. My hip was bad. I shuffled across the shop floor, slow, to the heritage display where my bench had been moved. The bench was still there, with the little sign on top of it. Whitaker Heritage Display. Original workbench. Circa 1981. I picked up the sign. I looked at it. Then I broke it. Not violently. I want to be clear. I did not throw it across the room. I did not curse at it. I just took it in both hands and snapped it across my knee, the way you snap kindling for a fire, and I dropped the 2 pieces into the trash can by the office door. It made a soft sound when it landed. I stood there a moment. I did not feel triumphant. I just felt that the sign had outlived its usefulness, and that an old man who has decided a thing has outlived its usefulness has the right to put it in the trash. I walked over to the bench. I put both hands on the top. I pushed. I pushed hard, with my back instead of my arms, the way you push a heavy thing when you have learned that arms will betray you. The bench moved, not far, about 6 inches. I stopped, breathed, pushed again. 6 more inches. I had it about a third of the way back to the middle of the shop when I heard the front door open. Daniel came in. He was carrying 2 paper bags from Marlene's diner. He stopped just inside the door and looked at me trying to move the bench, alone, across a concrete floor. He set the bags down on the design counter. He did not say anything. He walked over. He put his hands on the other end of the bench. He looked at me. I looked at him. "Middle of the room," I said. He nodded. We moved it together. We did not talk while we moved it. It took about 3 minutes. When we had it back where it belonged, in the center of the shop floor, in the spot where it had stood from 1981 until about 6 weeks ago, we both stepped back and looked at it. It looked right. That is the only way I can say it. The shop looked right with the bench in the middle. The CNC machine, which was still sitting where it had been, looked wrong now, like a stranger at a family table. But the bench looked right. Daniel said, "What about the CNC?" "Leave it for now. We will figure that out later. It has its uses, for some things." "Yes, sir." He went back to the design counter. He picked up the bags. He set them on the bench. He pulled out 2 club sandwiches and 2 cups of coffee and a small wrapped piece of pie. Marlene had sent the pie. There was a note taped to the wrapper, in her handwriting. Thomas. Good to see Daniel ordering for 2 again. Apple. On the house. Marlene. I read the note. I folded it. I put it in the pocket of my apron. We ate standing at the bench. We did not say much. He asked me a couple of questions about the joinery, and I answered them. After we finished eating, he pushed his paper plate aside, and he put both his hands flat on the bench. And he said, "Dad, I want to tell you something." "Go on, son." When I came back from Charlotte 3 years ago, when I told you and Mom that I wanted to take over the shop, I was not coming back to do this work. I was coming back because Rebecca was pregnant with Lily, and we could not afford to stay in Charlotte, and I knew you were going to need somebody. I told myself I was coming back to honor you. The truth is, I was coming back because I had run out of other options, and I think part of the reason I tried so hard to modernize the shop, and to make it efficient, and to bring in the engineered board and the machines, was because I was trying to prove to myself that I had chosen this, instead of having been chosen by it. I listened to that. I did not interrupt. I have learned, slow, over many years, that when a person finally starts saying the thing they have been afraid to say, the kindest thing you can do is be very still while they say it. And the harder I worked to make it look like I had chosen it, he said, the angrier I got at the work itself for not being the kind of work I had chosen, and the angrier I got at you for being the man who had built it. And I am not going to sit here and tell you I am not going to be angry like that ever again. I know myself well enough to know I probably will. But I am going to tell you that I see it now. I see what I have been doing, and I do not want to do it anymore. He stopped. He did not cry. He had cried earlier. This was not crying. This was just a man saying out loud to his father a thing he had been afraid to say for 3 years. I let it sit between us a moment. Then I said, "Daniel, I owe you something too." "Dad, listen, I owe you this. When you were 10 years old and I made you cut that circle with the coping saw, I was wrong. I had been telling myself for 30 years that I was teaching you a craft. The truth is, I was teaching you that the only way to be loved in this family was to be precise. I am sorry. I should have told you that morning that the first circle you cut was the best circle a 10-year-old in this country had ever cut. It was a fine circle, son. And I have been carrying that morning with me for 30 years without ever finding a way to give it back to you. So I'm giving it back to you now. I was wrong. I am sorry." He looked at me. He did not say anything. His mouth was a thin line. He nodded. It was the smallest nod a grown man ever gave to his father. But it was enough. We both knew it was enough. I want to tell you one more thing that happened that afternoon. And then I am going to close this part of the story. About 3 o'clock, after we had worked another 2 hours on the sample, after we had cut the last of the dovetails and dry fit the carcass, and stood back and looked at it together with the satisfaction of 2 men who had built something they were not embarrassed by, Daniel went out to his truck and came back with something in his hand. It was the old hand-painted Whitaker sign, the gold leaf one, the one he had taken from my barn the day before to hang in the hotel lobby. He set it on the bench. "They wanted me to take it down when they moved the furniture out," he said. I picked it up on the way back from the house. I looked at it. The lettering was still good. The gold leaf had held up. Whitaker and Son Fine Woodworks. Established 1893. "What do you want to do with it?" I asked. He did not answer right away. He looked at the sign. He looked at the bench. He looked at me. "I want to repaint it," he said. "Not because the paint is bad. The paint is good. I want to repaint it because I want my hands to have touched it. I want to do it myself, and then I want to hang it back up over the front door, the way it was when I was a boy." I looked at him a long moment. "All right, son." He picked up the sign. He carried it to the corner of the shop, near where his mother used to keep her bookkeeping desk, and he leaned it carefully against the wall. He stood looking at it a second. Then he came back to the bench. We worked until 6. We did not finish the sample. We did not need to. We finished what we needed to finish for that day. And then we shut off the lights, and we locked the back door, and Daniel locked the front door, and we walked together out into the gravel yard, in the cold, thin light of an early winter evening in Bedford County, Virginia. And we stood there a moment looking at the shop. The sign was not yet back up. The CNC machine was still inside. The boxes were still in the attic. The bench was back in the middle of the floor. It was not yet what it was going to be, but it was no longer what it had been. Daniel got in his truck. I got in mine. He pulled out first. I watched his taillights down the long driveway, around the bend, until they were gone behind the line of cedars my daddy had planted in 1952 as a windbreak. Then I drove home. The frost was already settling on the fields by the time I got there. My porch light was on. because I had left it on that morning when I drove out at 4:30 in the dark. The house was cold inside. I made a fire in the wood stove. I sat down in the chair by the window. I put my hands flat on my knees. And for the first time in 4 years, I did not feel alone. Thanksgiving came that year on the 27th of November, about 3 weeks after the morning at the shop with Pierce. I had been planning to do what I had done for the last 3 Thanksgivings, which was to go over to Daniel and Rebecca's house, eat a polite plate of turkey, listen to Lily tell me about her second-grade classroom, and drive home by 7 o'clock to sit in the chair by the wood stove. That was not what happened. On the Sunday before Thanksgiving, Daniel called me at the house. He called in the middle of the afternoon, and I had to come inside from the porch and dry my hands on a dish towel Eleanor had embroidered in 1996, with a small robin in the corner. "Dad," Daniel said. His voice had a small wobble in it. "Rebecca and I were wondering. We were wondering if you would have Thanksgiving at the farmhouse this year. With us. With Lily. The 3 of us would come to you." I stood there in the kitchen, holding the phone. It had been 4 years since I had hosted Thanksgiving in that farmhouse. The last one had been in 2021, when Eleanor was still well enough to be at the table. She had insisted on cooking. I had helped. We had made the pies together, and she had sat down at the kitchen table to roll out the crust because she did not have the strength to stand at the counter anymore, and she had laughed at me when I dropped flour on the floor. After that one, Daniel and Rebecca had taken over. They had been kind about it. They had set Eleanor's chair at their table every year, and they had put one of her embroidered napkins at the place setting. Hearing my son ask me, 4 years later, if I would host, was a thing that took me a minute to find a word for. "Yes, son," I said. "I would like that very much." "Are you sure, Dad?" "Daniel, I am sure. Bring Rebecca. Bring Lily. Come Wednesday night if you want and stay over." There was a small pause on the line. "Dad, could I ask you for one more thing?" "Ask." "Could we do the turkey in the smoker, the way you and Mom used to?" I closed my eyes for a moment in the kitchen. "Yes, son. We can do the turkey in the smoker." We hung up. I stood there a long time with my hand on the receiver, looking out at the bare maples in the yard. And I thought about how long it had been since anybody had asked me to do anything in this house, except hand them a casserole dish at the door. I cried a little, just a small thing, in the kitchen, with the dish towel in my hand. Then I went back out to the porch to finish the kindling, because there was a holiday coming and a house that needed to be warmer than it had been in a long time. Wednesday afternoon. Daniel and Rebecca and Lily drove up in his truck. Lily came out first, in a red coat I had not seen her in before, with her hair in 2 braids that Rebecca must have done that morning. She wrapped both arms around my legs. "Grandpa, we are sleeping over." "I know. Sugar. I made up the room you always sleep in. With the quilt with the stars on it. With the quilt with the stars on it." She looked up at me. She had something on her mind. Lily carries her thoughts on the front of her face the way a smaller child carries a stuffed animal. "Grandpa, Daddy said we are going to help you build something. After Thanksgiving." I looked over Lily's head at Daniel, who was unloading the truck. He had not told me that. He gave me a small, embarrassed smile, the kind of smile a son gives a father when he has been planning a surprise badly. Did he? Now. He said it was a surprise, but I do not like surprises. So I am asking you. I knelt down. My hip complained. I ignored it. Sugar, I do not know what your daddy has planned. But I will tell you this. Whatever it is going to be done in the workshop, and it is going to be done by hand, and you are going to put your hands on it. And that is the best kind of surprise there is. She thought about that. She nodded. She let go of my legs and ran off to investigate the chicken coop, where Margaret and Beatrice were giving her the suspicious look they give every visitor under the age of 40. I straightened up, slow. Daniel came over with 2 grocery bags in his arms. What is she talking about, son? I was going to tell you tonight, Dad. After she goes to bed. All right, tell me tonight. That evening, after Lily was upstairs in the room with the star quilt, Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of decaf coffee between us. The kitchen was warm. The wood stove was throwing heat into the back of the house. Outside, the wind had died down, and you could see the stars through the window over the sink. Daniel turned his coffee cup in his hands. Then he said it. Dad, I want to start a new piece. Just for us. Not for the shop. Not for a customer. For us. And I want Lily to be part of it. I want her to be able to say, when she is grown, that she put her hands on a thing her grandfather and her father built together. I have been thinking about it since Pierce came. I want to know what we should build. I looked at him. He did not know about the white oak, the remaining boards. I mean, he did not know what they were for. I had not told him. Pierce's order had taken 11 of the 23 boards. There were 12 left. What Daniel was asking me was a different question than I had been expecting. He was asking me if there was a thing the 3 of us, together, should make. I drank some of the coffee. I looked out the window at the stars. Daniel, I said, I am going to think about that. I will tell you tomorrow. Yes, sir. You don't have to call me sir at the kitchen table, son. He laughed, the first real laugh I had heard out of him in maybe 2 years. Yes, Dad. He went upstairs. I stayed at the kitchen table another half hour, looking out at the stars. I knew, sitting there, what the answer was going to be. The answer was the chest, the hope chest for Lily, the thing I had been keeping the wood for, the thing I had been saving as the last and best of my gifts to a granddaughter I was not sure I was going to live to see married. But the chest was no longer going to be just for me. It was going to be from all 3 of us. The way Daniel had asked. The way Lily was going to remember. And that was right. That was how it should have been all along. Thanksgiving Day was the kind of day you do not get many of in a lifetime, and you only recognize how few of them you get after most of them are behind you. I was up at 5:30 to get the smoker going. The morning was cold and still. I stood on the back porch with my coffee and watched the smoke rise gray-blue into the air. Lily came down at 7, in her pajamas and a wool blanket. She came out onto the porch barefoot and stood next to me and watched the smoke rise. Grandpa, it smells like Grandma. The smoker did not actually smell like Eleanor. But Lily was not talking about smells the way an adult would have meant it. She was talking about a feeling, the smell of Thanksgiving in this house, the shape of the family on the day when the smoker was lit. And in her 7-year-old way, she had reached for the only word that meant the right thing. I put my hand on the top of her head. Yes, sugar, it does. She nodded, then she looked up at me. Grandpa, can I ask you something? You can always ask me something. Lily. Did Grandma know about me before? I looked down at her. Yes, sugar. She knew about you. Did she like me? I knelt down. My hips screamed. I did not care. I put both my hands on her small shoulders, through the wool blanket, and I looked her right in the face. Lily Ann Whitaker, listen to me. Your grandma loved you so much, before you were even born, that she made me promise to teach you how to be brave. She said the world is going to ask you for it, and she wanted you to have what you need. Those were almost the last words she said to me, and I have been keeping that promise ever since. She nodded. Her eyes were wide. She did not cry. Grandpa? Yes, sugar. I have to go put on shoes. My feet are cold. I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes up out of a man without permission. The day went the way Thanksgiving days are supposed to go. Rebecca made the sides. The cousins from Lynchburg drove out. The farmhouse, which had been holding one man and a lot of silence for 4 years, suddenly held 14 people and a turkey and 3 pies. Hank said grace, the way he had been saying it on holidays since our daddy passed in 1998. He thanked God for the food. He thanked God for the family. He thanked God for Eleanor's memory. And he thanked God for the new beginnings he could see around the table. And he did not look at Daniel and me when he said that last part. But everybody at the table knew who he meant. We ate at 2 o'clock. We sat at the long cherry table I had built for Eleanor in 1987. I held Lily's hand on my left side and Rebecca's hand on my right side, and I felt my wife not being there with the particular sharpness of holidays. And at the same time, I felt my family being there with a fullness I had not felt in a long time. After the pie, after the dishes were done, after Hank and Patricia had driven back toward Lynchburg, the 4 of us sat in the living room by the wood stove. Me, Daniel, Rebecca, Lily. After a while, Daniel cleared his throat. Dad, are you ready to tell us? I looked at him. He had not forgotten. Yes, I said, I am ready. I sat forward in the chair. I put my hands on my knees. There is a stack of wood behind the shop, under the 3rd shelter. White oak, quarter sawn. I cut it 5 years ago, from a tree that fell on this property in a storm. There were 23 boards. There are 12 left. The other 11 went into the buffets we are building for Mr. Pierce. That tree was the white oak at the corner of the property, I said. The one your mother and I were married under in 1980. The one we took our wedding photographs against. The one I planted a second one beside in the spring of 1985, the year after Daniel was born. Daniel's mouth was a thin line. The tree came down in 2020. I said, I cut it up myself. I dried the boards under the tin roof. I was saving them for a project I had not told anybody about. Not even your mother. Although I think she knew. I paused. I looked at Lily. Sugar, I said. Those boards were for you. She tilted her head. For me? Yes. I was going to build you a chest. A hope chest. The kind a grandfather builds for a granddaughter. The kind you keep at the foot of your bed, and you put things into it when you are growing up. And when you grow up and you find someone you love enough to marry, you take the chest with you into your new house, and everything inside it is the story of who you have been. Lily did not move. Her face was getting very still. I cut the tree when you were 2 years old. Sugar. I have been drying those boards for you since before you could remember me. Rebecca was crying, silently. She had not made a sound. I looked at Daniel. 11 boards went to Mr. Pierce to save the contract. There are 12 left. That is enough for the chest. It will be smaller than I had planned, but it will be enough. He nodded. He was very still. And the reason I am telling you this now, instead of keeping it a secret the way I had planned, is because of what you asked me last night. You asked me what we should build together. The three of us. I leaned back in the chair. I want to build the chest with you, son. The two of us. And I want Lily to be part of it. I want her to sand the lid. I want her to put the brass hinges on with her own hands. And on the day she gets married. I want her to know that the chest she is carrying into her new life was made by her grandfather and her father, with her hands as part of the work. There was a silence. The fire popped in the stove. Lily got up off the rug. She climbed into my lap, the way she had when she was 3 years old, although she was much bigger now, and her elbow caught me in the ribs, and I did not care. She put her face against my shoulder. Then she said, in a very small voice that only I could hear, "Grandpa, thank you." I put my arms around her. Across the room, my son had his face in his hands, and his shoulders were shaking. Very slightly. Rebecca got up off the couch. She knelt down beside his chair and she put her hand on his back. The fire popped in the stove. The wind moved against the storm windows. And the four of us, in that living room, on the Thanksgiving night of the year I almost lost everything, were closer than we had ever been in our lives. Saturday morning, I drove to the shop alone. I made a pot of coffee. I poured myself a cup. Then I went to the office at the side of the shop. I opened the closet, I reached behind a stack of old invoices, and I pulled out a small cherry wood box I had built in 2003. The box had a hinged lid and a small brass clasp. It was about the size of a loaf of bread. It was the box where I had kept, for the last 4 years, a single envelope. I carried the box back to the bench. I sat down on the stool. I set the box in front of me. I am going to tell you, now, about the letter. When Eleanor first got sick, in the fall of 2020, she did not tell me right away. She had been having headaches. She had been losing her balance. She had gone to the doctor on her own. She had not told me what the doctor said for almost 3 weeks. In January of 2023, on a Tuesday morning, I came home from the shop and found her sitting at the kitchen table with a sheet of stationery in front of her and a pen in her hand. "What are you writing, Ellie?" "A letter." "To who?" "To you." "Hush. Don't read over my shoulder." She folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, wrote my name on the front in the handwriting she had learned at the Lynchburg Girls' School in 1958, and handed it to me. "What is this, Ellie?" "It is a letter. You are not to open it now." "When am I to open it?" "You will know." Ellie. "Tom, listen to me. You will know. When the time comes, you will know." She had died 11 days later, in her sleep. A second stroke. I had put the letter in the cherry box in the closet. For 4 years, I had not opened it. Because every time I thought I knew what the time was, the time had turned out to be something smaller than I had thought. That Saturday morning, sitting alone at the bench, I knew. I took a small folding knife out of my apron pocket. I slit the envelope along the top edge. I took out the letter. It was 1 page. Her writing was small and even, except for the last few lines, which got a little larger. I read it. I am going to write down what it said, because I do not think I can tell this story honestly without telling you what was on that page. It said, "Tom, I am writing this because I know you. I know you will need to hear this from me, and I know you will not believe it from anybody else. So I am putting it in writing where you cannot argue with me. Daniel is going to come home. He is going to come home before he is ready, because Rebecca is pregnant and they cannot afford Charlotte. And he is going to try to make the shop into something it is not, because he does not yet know how to honor a thing without changing it. He is going to hurt you. He is not going to mean to. He is going to do it anyway. I want you to forgive him before he asks, because he is going to spend 3 years or maybe more trying to find his way back to you. And the only thing that will get him there is if the way is already open when he arrives. Tom, your father raised you to measure. You raised our son to measure. Daniel has been trying to outmeasure both of you his whole life. Tell him he does not have to. Tell him the first circle was a fine circle. Tell him you've been proud of him since before he could hold a pencil. Now the other thing. There is a granddaughter coming. Her name is going to be Lily. Rebecca told me yesterday at the doctor. I have not told you yet because I do not want you to worry about my heart for 1 more minute than you have to. But there is going to be a Lily, Tom, and she is going to be the best of all of us. Build her something with your hands. Build her something from the tree at the corner. I know you have been saving the boards. I know you think I do not know. I know. Build her the chest. But Tom, do not build it alone. Build it with Daniel. Let him put his hands on it. Let him learn what you know by doing it on her chest, so that when she opens it on her wedding day, the wood remembers all 3 of you. Last thing, the one I do not want to write, but I have to. Your legacy is not the shop. Your legacy is not the work. Your legacy is the way you make the people who love you want to be more like you. Live long enough to teach Daniel that. Live long enough to teach Lily that. And then you can come find me. But not before. I will wait. I am good at waiting. I have loved you for 60 years, Tom Whitaker. I will love you for the next 62, from wherever I am going. Ellie. I sat at the bench for a long time after I read the letter. I cried. I am not going to pretend I did not. I cried the way a man cries when his wife has reached across 4 years from wherever she is and put her hand on the back of his neck and said the thing he had been needing to hear since the morning he buried her. She had known. She had known all of it. She had known about Daniel coming home. She had known about the shop. She had known about the boards. She had known about Lily before I had known about Lily. She had known what I was going to need to do 4 years before I was going to need to do it. I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I put the envelope back in the cherry box. I closed the lid. Then I got up. I picked up the marking gauge my daddy had made me in 1976. I walked over to the stack of white oak boards. I marked the first line. The line came up clean. We worked on the chest through the winter, Saturdays, mostly. Daniel and Lily and me. Lily came on Saturdays in a small canvas apron Rebecca had sewn for her over Christmas, with her name embroidered on the chest pocket in blue thread. She came with a notebook in her apron pocket, into which she had been writing down, in her careful second-grade printing, the names of everything she was learning: marking gauge, mortise, tenon, dovetail, quarter sawn. I taught her the way I had taught Daniel, out loud, while my hands kept working. I had her sit on a small wooden stool I had built her, painted blue, with her name on the side in white paint. I had her hold the boards steady when I marked them. I had her hand me chisels from a small leather roll with 5 chisels of her own. She was good. By the end of January, she could cut a straight line with a coping saw. Slow but true. By the end of February, she could mark a line with the gauge that was within a 1/16 of an inch. Daniel watched her, on those Saturdays, with a look on his face I had not seen on a man's face in a long time. It was the look of a father seeing a child do a thing he had not been allowed to do himself at her age, and recognizing it, and not minding the recognition. We finished the chest on the last Saturday of March. It was a smaller chest than the one I had originally planned, 28 inches long, 16 inches wide, 18 inches tall. Quarter sawn white oak on all 6 sides, hand-cut dovetails at the corners, a lid that lifted on 2 brass hinges, a cedar lining inside. The chest was beautiful. The dovetails on the right rear corner were just a hair off square, because Lily had been the one to mark them, and we had agreed, the 3 of us, that we were going to keep her marks rather than correct them. Lily sanded the lid herself. 2 hours, with breaks. I taught her to go with the grain, never against, and how to feel the surface with her palm at the end of each grade. After the sanding, Daniel and I oiled the chest, tongue oil, 3 coats. The wood drank the oil and turned a deeper, warmer color, going from pale honey to something closer to amber. The 3 of us stood in front of the chest, and we did not say anything for a long minute. Then Lily said, "Grandpa, can I put the key in the lock now?" "Yes, sugar." She took the brass key out of her apron pocket. She slid the key into the keyhole. She turned it. There was a small click. She turned the key back the other way. She lifted the lid. The cedar smell came up out of the chest into the room. She stood there a long time, just looking. Then she turned around. "It is mine," she said. Not a question. A statement. "Yes, sugar. It is yours." She closed the lid. She turned the key. She took the key out and held it up to me. "You keep it, Grandpa, until I am ready." I took the key. It was warm from her palm. "I will keep it safe, Lily." Daniel came over to me. He stood next to me in front of the chest. Neither of us said anything for a long time. Finally, he said, "Dad, I want to tell you one thing." "Go on, son." "I am going to keep building furniture, the way you taught me, for the rest of my life. I do not know if I will be as good as you. I do not need to be. But I am going to do this. And one day I am going to teach my children's children the way you taught me, and the shop is going to be here for them. The Whitaker name is going to mean what it has always meant." I did not say anything for a moment. "Daniel, I have been waiting 41 years to hear you say something like that, and I am glad I lived long enough to hear it." He put his arm around my shoulders. The first time he had done that since he was about 15 years old. We hung the sign over the front door a week later. Daniel had repainted it himself. He had stripped the old gold leaf off carefully, layer by layer, and applied new leaf in the same pattern. He had not changed the lettering. He had repainted it the way it had been, as a way of saying that the work had not changed. Whitaker and Son Fine Woodworks, established 1893. We hung it on a Saturday morning in early April. Daniel on the stepladder, me on the ground holding the bottom edge, Lily standing on the gravel with her hands clasped together, supervising, Rebecca with her phone out, taking pictures. When the sign was up, Lily said, "Grandpa, should it not say Whitaker and Sons, with an S, because Daddy is your son, and I am Daddy's daughter?" I looked down at her. I looked up at the sign. I looked at Daniel. He was smiling, the biggest smile I had seen on him since he was a boy. "Sugar, when you are old enough to want your name on a sign, we will paint a new one, with your name on it, the way it should be, and the S will be there." She nodded, as if this had settled something important. She ran off to see Margaret and Beatrice. Daniel and I stood there in the gravel yard. I thought about Eleanor, about the letter, about the 4 years between her dying and the morning we had hung the sign. She had been right about everything. She had been right that Daniel would come home before he was ready. She had been right that he would hurt me without meaning to. She had been right that I would have to forgive him before he asked. She had been right about Lily. She had been right about the tree and the boards and the chest. She had been right about my legacy. My legacy was not the shop. My legacy was not the work. My legacy was the way I had made the people I loved want to be more like me. And in a small way, I had been doing that, all along. In the years I had thought I was failing at it. The wind moved through the cedars. Lily ran back across the yard, her braids flying. Daniel and I went inside to get to work. I want to say one more thing to you before I close this story. I am 69 years old. I do not know how many more years I get, but I have learned, in the last few months, that the years a man has left are not the years that matter most. The years that matter most are the ones he has already lived, and the ways he chooses to remember them, and the ways he passes them along to the people who come after him. I gave away the shop. I gave it away too quietly and too soon, and to a son who was not yet ready. He hurt me. I knew he was going to. I let him anyway, because I loved him more than I loved being right. And in the end, the giving away was what saved us. The giving away was what made room for the coming back. If I had held on, the way pride would have told me to, my son would have spent the rest of his life trying to outrun me, and I would have spent the rest of mine trying to outweight him. We would have died on opposite sides of the same shop, with the same name on the same sign, and we would have lost each other. But because I let him take it, and he took it badly, and we both lived through what came next, the shop is still here, and the name is still here, and there is a granddaughter with a small brass key in her apron pocket who is going to carry this work into a century I am not going to see. That is the lesson. If there is a lesson, I am not going to preach. But if you have something in your own life you are holding too tight, and the holding is hurting somebody you love, I will only say this: consider the giving. The cost may be more than you think you can pay, but there are things on the other side of the giving that you cannot get to any other way. There are people you love who can only come back to you through the door you open by letting them go. I learned that late. I am still learning it. I want to thank you, friend, for sitting with me this long, for listening to an old man tell a long story about a stack of wood and a shop and a boy. I do not know who you are, or where you are, or what you are carrying, but I hope something in this story was useful to you. I hope you have a Daniel in your life, or a Lily, or an Eleanor. I hope you tell them the things you have been carrying before the carrying gets too heavy. If this story meant something to you, I would be obliged if you would press the little thumb that means yes, and if you have a few friends who might like to hear an old man tell a story, you might share it with them. My son has been trying to teach me the modern part. He says these small things help the story reach the people who need it. May God bless your hands, friend, and may God bless the people your hands are taking care of. And the next time you sit down at a table that somebody you love built for you, run your palm across the grain and listen. The wood remembers. It always remembers.